The Rattlesnake TV man himself, Jake Julius. He's here.
Obviously, you've been feminized by the feminism that is in the water that you drink and the air that you breathe, my friend. This is the problem with feminism.
Everyone's view is definitely inherently biased. So this is when debate becomes very interesting.
I can hear what you're saying, but then I can see that you're dressed as a cat.
I'm a dog.
You said you like to go play fetch.
Wolf, yes.
So how does that tie into your relationship? Like, what are you looking for if you're a dog?
Yeah, I think that Don Jr. will be president one day. If I was a gambling man, I'd put money on that.
You are not a gambling man.
He's got.
Man, I really appreciate it, dude.
Nice to see you. Alrighty, welcome everybody. We have got a live edition of the Reality Based Podcast, and I'm joined here by David Patrick Harry, one of my favorite YouTube channels by far. I've been trying to get this conversation happening, but David has been doing his PhD. I don't know how you do those long, hours-long lectures plus study for a PhD. I've got no idea how you do this. And recently I was speaking to a few of my friends who are really deep in Christian theology, and they study it a lot. And they two different guys who I respect a lot were both said to me, "Dude, you need to check out this channel, Church of the Eternal Logos." And I was like, "I watch it all the time. It's one of my favorites." So thanks for coming on, man.
Brother, man. I'm humbled and really appreciate those kind words. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. So today I really want to cover your journey from New Age spirituality into Orthodox Christianity, because this seems to be a pipeline that a few people have taken, but I don't think that many people actually take the whole pipeline, if you understand what I mean, because a lot of people get caught in the New Age spirituality and they just stay there, and they don't realize that it's dark and demonic because it's presented to the Western world as this really sort of this ideology that's morally superior to Christianity and to patriarchy and to all of these types of things. And it's basically just sitting around and holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but that's not necessarily the truth. So I'm interested to get into your journey. Ayahuasca. Exactly right. Drinking grandma ayahuasca. So I'm interested to get into your journey about how you, Andrew's going to kill us for saying journey, by the way, but but your path to getting to Orthodox Christianity and where it all started with you and how you got into the New Age stuff.
Right. Well, it's kind of a long, winding story. So my background and how I got into Orthodoxy, I didn't convert to Orthodox Christianity till got serious about it in 2019, was aware of it in 2018. And during one of my courses, during my PhD studies, I actually did one on the history and theology of the Orthodox Church. And at that point, I was a non-believer. And I actually had a very successful YouTube channel, or at least growing, promoting psychedelics. So I would edit like Terrence McKenna, Alan Watts, Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, and things like that in regards to promoting psychedelics. And got to Berkeley. It was at the Graduate Theological Union where I did my studies, and actually was promoting all that stuff, focusing on that YouTube channel, and actually wrote a paper on this book called The Psychedelic Gospels, which is focused on looking at these very unique frescoes, particularly in Germany, southern France, in Italy and Turkey, all around the same period. It's about like a 400-year window between the 900s and the 1300s. And I was at that point promoting psychedelics. And so there was a famous book by a gentleman named R. Gordon Wasson and his wife, Valentina Pavlova, called like Russia, History and Mushrooms, or it's those three words, maybe the order. It's been a while since I looked at it. But anyways, the premise of that book is R. Gordon Wasson wrote like the first article in 1957 in Life magazine promoting the use of psilocybin mushrooms and the contacting of these medicine workers, these helpers, machine elves. Terrence McKenna talks about them. And it had to do with Maria Sabina, this Mazatec shamaness in Mexico, and how she would use mushrooms and contact these entities and perform healings. And anyway, he's kind of the first person to write about it. Very interesting story about our Gordon Wasson, because he's tied to like JP Morgan, all this different stuff. Makes you think, was all this psychedelic stuff planned by some of the intelligence agencies and powers that be? But anyways, he wrote a book with his wife, and it described how the Slavic languages and Slavic people are what he described as like mushroom philic, meaning they have a historical language that has so many different terms regarding mushrooms. And this is not the case in what he considered mushroom phobic cultures, which is basically Germanic and English cultures, Anglo cultures, that we only have like toadstool, fungus, and mushroom to describe this species, where like in Slavic languages, even cultures, it's very common for grandmothers to take like their daughter or granddaughters out into the woods and show them all the words and show them which mushrooms are used. So anyways, aware of that, I thought, geez, well, all those Orthodox people have icons. And based on this book, The Psychedelic Gospels, and finding these Gnostic icons that depict the Eucharist as a mushroom, I thought, man, I'll probably find it in all the Slavic stuff that's Orthodox. And so I did this course, and didn't find any of the mushrooms I was looking for, but I did find at that point a worldview that was so much more comprehensive and coherent than this like hodgepodge of spiritual worldviews as perennialism or syncretism mixed with psychedelics, mixed with new age ideas about consciousness and enlightenment and stuff like that. So that's where I get into Orthodoxy. But before this, I had this whole spiritual journey really beginning as I got into college. And so I grew up like a conservative Methodist. And it was very naive, juvenile faith. And by the time I get into college, I take this course on the Bible. And of course, I'm dealing with a critical scholar, and he's showing me all the multiple authorship theories of the Gospels, the similarities between the Epic of Gilgamesh and Noah, and just totally shattered like this very naive Christianity I grew up with. I'm like, holy shit. I mean, and then of course, nobody around me or my friends that were still Christian like heard of any of this stuff. So
this is like the zeitgeist sort of thing, isn't it? Yeah, I remember watching the zeitgeist a few years back, maybe 10 years ago or so. And this is when I was like a liberal atheist myself and thinking, I can't believe I've never seen this stuff before. It's like they have all these similarities between the Egyptian gods and the Greek gods and Christianity, and it's all just one big mush in flux.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the zeitgeist is big, like Jesus Christ is Mithra and Horus and all these solar deities in history. And yeah, so the zeitgeist was definitely shaped, I think, our generation. It was incredibly influential in the early 2000s in regards to just conspiracies, Federal Reserve. Like there's a lot of things in there that I still hold to be true, but it's the spiritual stuff was mixed with essentially the syncretism or perennialism. And I pretty much adopted that.
What does that mean, by the way? You have to maybe speak in small
Okay,
words
so
for me.
perennial means something like a perennial flower is something that blooms, in each season. Perennialism is a term that refers to a worldview in which there is an undergirding ultimate truth, spirituality, theology that undergirds all the world religions. And really this got going after the Renaissance. So we find people like Marsilio Ficino or Pico della Mirandola, Giovanni Pico, that they developed this sort of Renaissance hermetic philosophy / theology, where they believed Hermes was like the oldest person, sage in history, that he was older than Moses. And because they believed Hermes Trismegistus was older than Moses, this is why Cosimo de' Medici told Marsilio Ficino, so when the Byzantine Empire collapses and the Ottoman Turks take over, they have all these manuscripts in Greek that the Latin West didn't have. And at that point, the Latin West did not have the complete works of Plato. They did have Aristotle. And this is really what shapes scholasticism and Western thought, being much more logical and inductive approach. But Marsilio is translating Plato, and Cosimo de' Medici, arguably the wealthiest man in the world at that time in Florence, Italy, tells him, hey, stop that and translate Hermes Trismegistus, the Hermetic corpus, immediately. I want to read this before I die. And the presupposition was that Hermes was older than Moses, and therefore whatever he said was closer to God's truth. They had this presupposition that the older something was, the truer it was, because as things move through history, they become diluted. And so perennialism, which develops into a school called traditionalism with Blavatsky and Steiner and all these different thinkers, arguing that there's essentially a spirituality that's more true, that is united with all the world religions. So no one world religion is true, but a perennial spirituality that takes the good and the unifying parts of each one, that's the true faith. And so that's what perennialism or syncretism means. And that was kind of my worldview. So after I lose that sort of naive Christianity, I was a double major in religious studies and biology. And I was competing in Taekwondo, Korean martial arts, not very practical. Don't recommend it, but it's good, good for athleticism and stuff like that. It's a good sport. It's like an Olympic sport more than a true like jujitsu or something like that. Anyways, became fascinated with like East Asia through some of these religious studies courses. So Buddhism and Taoism in particular, and then also the Vedic traditions of Jainism and Hinduism coming out of the Indian subcontinent. So I thought, man, that stuff's really cool. I wasn't aware of all this stuff. Buddhism and Taoism particularly resonated with me. So I thought, you know what? I want to go to China. I'm into martial arts. Why don't we had a Confucius Institute at the time. Those have since been shut down because it turns out the CCP was actually spying on all these universities in America through them. But I actually got a scholarship through the Confucius Institute for 2 years to go study at Sun Yat-sen University, Zhongshan Daxue in Guangzhou, China, southern China.
So you're a Chinese spy is what you're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. So
Chinese
I'm working for
intelligence.
the CCP. Yeah. And Dyer, he's actually has a direct connection to Putin. So you got to watch out with the orthosphere.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of intelligent stuff going on there. I recently read a book. Rachel Wilson gifted me a bunch of books when I was in Michigan, and one of them was called Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose. Really, really interesting book. And it basically, for those of you guys who haven't heard about it, it goes through all of the New Age religions and basically how the New Age spirituality has infiltrated the West through practices like yoga. And you get all of these shamanistic type characters who came and brought this to the West and popularized it. And you see it so much these days where people are thinking, oh, this is like a religion of peace. And yet all of these young chicks who think they're Buddhists now and who think that they're Hindus because they think that this is some sort of an elevated moral spirituality to have. So it's actually kind of concerning. But then when you look at the bigger picture and how these people genuinely believe in this one world religion and like this perennialism, like you say, it kind of does make sense when you look at the way in which these New Age spiritualities have infiltrated the Western world.
Yeah. And I would argue one of the appeals of psychedelics, New Age, and occultism is that Protestant Christianity just lacks a mystical dimension. I mean, I, as an Orthodox Christian, would question its sacramentality because sacraments or things like the Eucharist, for example, are much more symbolic in Protestantism. And because of the five solas, in my opinion, I'm sure there's people watching that would disagree. It's more of an ideology than what we would consider more typical of religions regarding the relationship to matter and how God or spirituality can be infused in matter. So, for Protestants, you often hear them complaining about capitalism and communism and Marxism and social other ideologies. And Orthodoxy is focused on like the spiritual world itself. And so if you grow up in a Protestant family, and then you find out that you can have ecstatic experiences on ayahuasca or LSD or psilocybin mushrooms or DMT explosions and breakthrough. It's like, wow, well, that must be what real religion, what real spirituality is about, because there is no like direct participation with God. He's kind of distant, and you pray and you live a good life and you make sure you go to church on Sunday. And that's really about it. So I think that the New Age one of the reasons it was so successful in the 1960s in the counterculture is because that's what the counterculture was. It was a fracturing of this Protestant foundation, and then the emergence of this new paradigm that we live in now. And you can be sympathetic to some of those countercultural people who wanted a spirituality that went a little bit deeper, more mystical. Obviously, like you're pointed out with Father Seraphim Rose's book, he's highlighting how all these practices have lured people in post-counterculture. And Orthodoxy really is the religion of the future because it's a return back to the first millennium church that is highly mystical. And we can get into like New Age stuff because one time, one of the things before I became Orthodox, I took a few doses of LSD one night in my apartment in the Bay Area in Berkeley. And I came to the realization, this is after I took this course on like Orthodox theology and history. And I thought, and I'm not a believer. I don't believe Jesus walked on water at the time. This is what I thought. But if I was going to adopt a religion, that Orthodoxy, because it's so sophisticated in its articulation of logos and, and just the the articulation of the paradigm presented Christ, a cosmic Christ that I had never heard before, but it really resonated with my New Age worldview. So I loved like sacred geometry, pi phi, fractals, that type of stuff, bright colors, the idea that you are on a journey to become God. Language, for example, I mean, occultism is built on this premise that language is actually like the foundation of reality. Again, logos, the word of God, is the foundation. He's the metaphysical foundation, quite the literal foundation. And so during this LSD experience, I connected like all these dots. And it was that when I came down from it, it was that day that I began to pray for the first time since that college course that totally shattered my naive Christianity. And so that's where I think this pipeline, as you began the conversation about from psychedelics or New Age into Orthodoxy, I'm kind of the guy online that represents that funnel. And I talk with a lot of people that come out of like the psychedelics phase. And that's why I think Orthodoxy is so appealing for people coming out of occultism, New Age, and psychedelics, is that it's highly mystical. It also offers you tradition. It offers you participation, community, and all the things you like about like New Age spirituality. It's there, but the caveat is there's an objective moral structure. And so I just talked about like cosmic Christ spirituality. The thing about the New Age, they have no objective morality. And so this is why their spirituality does away with the concept of sin. The only thing that's harmful or sin is if you harm another person. But again, what does harm mean? Because they're also in favor, many of them are in favor of like the castration of children. So it's just like a fancy way to say, no, we're good people, just don't harm anybody. But then when you really push down, like, what do you mean by harm? Because a lot of the things you believe in, we could deem harmful. There's no objective standard for anything. And this is why it's really is a postmodern spirituality in that sense. There is no, the only universal meta narrative, even though they have them, it's that you are God. You just have to realize that David Patrick Harry is a false temporal identity, and that really what I am is something that is within every person. I am cosmic consciousness. I am Christ consciousness, something like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can't, because I'm trying to get a visa to the US, so I can't really say about the experiences that I've had. So I'm going to say that my friend had this experience.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine did DMT a few years ago, and a friend of mine has done a bit of LSD as well. And that friend of mine had a really great day on LSD, walked around a park in London with a bunch of his friends and was sitting around on the grass, which was fun. And it is a fun experience. But then when my friend did our DMT, at the time it seemed fun, but knowing what my friend knows now, it seemed like a very demonic experience, because you go into it, right? And the first thing that happened was that there was a void of it sort of seemed like an LSD trip at the very start, in the way that the things started to move around and morph and shape.
Right.
But then it went into some sort of a void, and it looked like there was this massive void, and at the very bottom there was like lava of some sort, and there were spirits down there laughing and mocking my friend and saying, is this really what you want? Is this really what you want? Laughing and mocking. And then you sort of understand that, okay, apparently there are things that test you, and you have to go through these little rituals, and you have to pass the test of some sort.
Right.
So then my friend said, yeah, it is what I want, and then got through that. And then there was all of these Buddhist sort of yellow clothed people dancing around, and Hindu sort of figures dancing around, and really cool music. And I just want to know what the hell is actually going on there. Like, what do you actually think is happening there? Because you understand how the Buddhists and the Hindus came to their symbology. If this is something that actually is, how do you say, there's something that transcends that religion, something that happened before that religion, and this is maybe how they got their symbology and their pictures of what gods look like, if you understand what I mean.
Well, regarding what's happening under the psychedelic experience, at least from an Orthodox perspective, and I think this is true from a phenomenological perspective, anybody who's taken psychedelics, is that the way the church kind of talks about it is that these are things that will sort of move away the veil between us and the spiritual realm. And so our anthropology as Orthodox Christians is that there's a piece of us that's outside space and time. It's like our nous. So we have a body, soul, and then the eye of the soul is your nous. And in a way we can think about this is that demons and angels are noetic entities. So they don't have physical bodies. Well, we are noetic entities, but we do have physical bodies. And so we believe as Orthodox Christians that the place where spiritual warfare occurs primarily is in your mind. It's the imagination, because this is the piece of us that's poking out of space-time right now. This is why you can think about the past and project in the future and be aware of the present, because in a way, this is a divine feature of our anthropology. So psychedelics are essentially dissolving a natural boundary between us and these noetic entities. And it's that people have never had psychedelics and like Christ or a major change in their life has occurred. That does occur. God can reach people anywhere. However, what's very often the case is that people come in contact with these entities, and there's a very general framework. It's a very globalist. It's that we're all the same thing. And you hear this from McKenna, you hear this from Leary, you hear this from a lot of the modern psychedelic new age gurus, is that what the enlightenment is in the psychedelic experience is that we are all one, that we're a unified consciousness, that we are killing the planet, that we need to actually, according to McKenna, like half the planet needs to go away because of what we're doing as a society is destroying it. You start going through a lot of this stuff, and you find that's very eerily like, from an Orthodox perspective, like a movement towards Babylon, the new Babylon. It's about a one world religion. It's about a high-tech society, full total control, centralized control. It's a turning away from Christ and objective traditions, or tradition generally, but objective metaphysics, objective epistemology, morality. And then they're openly talking about like the overpopulation problem, a la Bill Gates and the Davos and all the, the big hitters that we all know of. And so it's very interesting how the insight people are getting is like very similar to the larger meta narrative of globalism in our entire culture, which makes you think maybe spiritually these things are connected somehow. And of course I do. So when you're talking about the experience of the void, a big difference between the Orthodox paradigm and Buddhism in particular, is they believe in an ad-atman, so the lack of a soul. Atman is a Sanskrit term for soul. Anatman is Sanskrit for the lack of a soul. And so Buddhists understand that your composition as a person is like a tumbleweed. It's the collection of karma that has accrued throughout multiple lifetimes. And so what the goal is to, through meditation, through the Eightfold Path, is you're peeling away all this debris so that you realize there's nothing there. And that then your personal identity, all this stuff can then move back into like total unity. We believe that to be ultimately satanic, because we believe God himself to be personal. So 3 persons, 1 essence. And so personhood is a central dimension of how we relate to divinity itself. And so the idea that I'm David Patrick Harry, Orthodox, we would say that is not an illusion. Now, ego, being egotistic, narcissistic, all these things are obviously problems. But you realizing that you are a unique person and that you matter and you have a soul and what you do matters, that is, the idea that you need to annihilate your person and like come to this conclusion, assume a totally new identity. This is like a destruction of your personhood. This is you becoming something that's very different from the way God created us to be. And you see this in the New Age. So this constant attempt to annihilate oneself or destroy their ego, ironically builds their ego up. Like if you talk to somebody who has had hundreds of LSD or psychedelic experiences, at the same point they'll tell you that they've transcended their ego, and they'll say that I'm now Blue Moon or whatever, some weird ass name. It's like they're also the most prideful to tell you that you haven't done this, you don't know this, I've experienced this. And so there's this really interesting irony that when people go into these new age or psychedelic or occultism, it's all built on this sort of Gnostic presupposition of attaining spiritual knowledge, which elevates you over someone else, even though they think they're like doing the opposite. So it's like
Dude, I see this all the time. I live in Bali at the moment, and Bali is an absolute hotbed for this. You get
It is. I didn't
basically
know you were
an
involved.
influx. I'm in Bali, yeah. So you get an influx of white girls coming over from various different Western countries, and all of these sort of male feminist guru shaman type guys who get all the little scattered tattoos everywhere. And they basically get over here and they do a few little yoga retreats and go into the various different temples and pyramids in the northern parts of Bali, and they all of a sudden become enlightened shamans, all of them, and they become the worst, most insufferable fart sniffers you've ever encountered in your entire life. But it's so true. They're so prideful, and they think that they're so elevated. Every time you talk to them, they speak as they have some sort of moral superiority, and it does my head in. It's to no end. It pisses me off.
Yeah,
But you're so right about
like
that. They
you're a
become so
child.
prideful.
Yeah,
Yes.
like you're a child, and like they're like, oh, that's really nice. You know that
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is consciousness, right? And it's
Yes. Yeah.
it's like they're
I
always
had the
trying to
worst
tell you
one.
something. Like they have a novel insight you haven't heard of.
Yeah, I was at a dinner the other week, and there was this dude who runs breathwork ceremony. It was like a big table dinner with a bunch of people that I knew, and this dude was there who runs breathwork seminars. And I was just trying to talk to him just like a normal dude, like you and I are talking right now. And every time I would say something, he would pause and he would go,
Oh God!
and I was like, this is killing the cadence of the conversation right now. I get it that you're spiritually enlightened and whatever, but can we have a normal conversation? And every time I did it, and what did I say? I said, because I don't like to sort of speak too ideologically or whatever. And we were talking about meditation, and then he was talking about his meditation stuff. And I said, yeah, for me, I find that boxing is a good form of meditation because you're not really thinking about anything else. You're in that moment and you're just focused on that one thing. It's a good release. And he goes to me, yeah, I mean, we're meditating right now. And I was like,
Oh God!
what? And he goes, and he pauses for like 5 seconds, and everyone just like looking at him, and he goes, we're here. And me and my brother, bro, we had to try so hard not to absolutely curl over laughing at this guy.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it's insufferable.
I've just met so many people like that. It's so infuriating to talk with them, and really this is why so many of them at least used to be my friends, and so my life's definitely changed after being Orthodox. But when I started to get into Orthodoxy, and after that LSD experience, where I began to pray again, I was not Orthodox. I was like subtly moving into that direction. It really took a full year of like reading scripture, like getting back into Christianity to really like, I mean, the goal is to like open up your heart to the point, if somebody makes fun of me now because I believe Jesus did miracles or walked on water, it's like, okay, like I can easily defend myself, feel confident in that position. But when you first start getting back into Christianity, like accepting the worldview and the faith entirely, that's kind of difficult. It's like you try to piece things together, like, no, I'm a red letter Christian, everything that Jesus said is true, the miracle. And so you're always like working through this process. But I remember starting my YouTube channel, Church of the Eternal Logos. One of the impetus for doing that was for me to like articulate myself to anybody, like if you were coming from the New Age, like why I believe what I believe now, because you deal with those people. And again, the irony is they're terrible listeners. So if you were actually trying to like explain yourself, like say you were talking to that guy, you're like, you know what, I'm actually interested in Orthodoxy, and this is why I believe it. Actually, maybe only one religion is fully true. Like they don't hear you. They already assume, okay, this guy's, he believes in religion, he believes in man-made myths and this stuff. It's difficult to have deep conversations with some of them if you're coming from a more right-leaning or traditional or conservative place for them. And so my YouTube channel was essentially me trying to talk about the world and why I'm seeing it from an Orthodox perspective and why the dots are connecting. It's making more and more sense. That's essentially what I'm trying to do on the YouTube channel. It's just like, here's dots that are happening in society. Here's how it connects. And here's how Orthodox, if you look at it from our lens, it like the picture gets a little bit bigger and the resolution increases and you can see things maybe you weren't fully aware of before.
Yeah, well, if any of you guys haven't checked out the channel, it's Church of the Eternal Logos. It's pinned in the comments below in the bio. I think it might even be pinned in the chat, but it's definitely in the bio below. And you don't even do that. You do a lot of you don't only do that. You do a lot of things about. I watched the one about the Khazars. That was really interesting. You do stuff about CIA operations and all of this and this global religion, and it's really super interesting, man. But one of the things that I really wanted to touch on with you was we talked a little bit before about the nature of Buddhism and why that's demonic and satanic, why that's ultimately satanic. But you said that you studied a lot of the Sanskrits, and a lot of people also get sort of trapped by this Buddhist ideology as well, and they think that Buddhism is like we said before, elevated from Christianity and from Western religions or from Christianity in general. So, what is Hinduism exactly, and why do you think that people are so attracted to this religion? How has it made such a splash in the West?
So what is Hinduism? To give a very quick overview. So Hinduism is a term used by the British to identify the collection of religious practices in the Indian subcontinent. Those then are divided between Buddhism and Jainism. Jainism's like an ultimate nonviolent religion where you'll see people like sweeping the sidewalk to make sure they don't step on a bug. One of the highest forms of death in Jainism is to no longer eat and just kill through suicide, self-sacrifice. It's viewed as like a massive spiritual discipline to just allow yourself to die by not consuming anything anymore. But Hinduism, what we typically mean by Hinduism is the Vedic tradition that was founded by Indo-Europeans. So at one point, Indo-Europeans ruled India and developed what they considered a revealed religion. So not all religions are revealed, claiming that they have a text, a message from God. And they did this through the Vedas. And they believed that it was a revealed religion. And so these Vedic gods kind of set the basis for later evolutions of mythology through, the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna talking to Arjuna about his dharma and that he needs to die in battle because this is the purpose of his life and this is what's going to propel him to a higher state in the next life. So Hinduism is a worldview that's developed by the Indo-Europeans, later then built upon through the history of India. And it has, it's famous for having over 1 million gods. And it's built on a sort of bhakti devotional practice. So you can choose Shiva or Ganesha or Krishna as your devotional god for your family. So if you talk to an Indian, almost every Indian comes from a family and they'll have a particular devotion. They may be a Shivite or a Vishnavite. They may worship Vishnu. And so in their understanding, they worship an avatar. So these Indian gods are not incarnate. They're avatars, they're emanations, they're representations. They appear for people. People can see them and engage with them, but they're not incarnating. They're not uniting human nature with divine nature. So I hear so many people try to say, well, Hinduism, the gods are here. It's not the same thing, dude. Like it's very simple. Like the details of the theology, it's not the same thing. If you just look at it superficially, okay, there's gods you can interact with, but so it's about a devotional practice to these various deities that allow them then to venerate Brahma, the ultimate form of reality. And so through the cycle of samsara, this death and rebirth, they are trying to attain moksha, which is enlightenment. Again, a very Gnostic understanding of spiritual progress, that through enlightenment, through moksha, and there's various yogas, not just like the yoga you see at the yoga studio. There's jhana yoga. It's about knowledge. It's philosophical. The idea is that you can become enlightened and be released from samsara through like actual knowledge. So they have all these forms of yoga. Yoga just means a yoking of your soul to God, because Hindus, unlike Buddhists, believe in a soul. So they have the Atman. So they're trying to elevate the soul, that the soul can break out of the cycle of death and rebirth. The Buddhist is saying that this is all an illusion, and what's happening is you are reincarnating, but it's all due to your karma. So those are big differences. The reason why I think Hinduism is so appealing, and it was not appealing until the counterculture. I mean, we have like the first representative, I forget which guru it was at the World Fair in Chicago at the end of the 1800s. It was like the first time there was a fair that depicted the world religions together. It was in Chicago, Illinois. And it offers a worldview in which it's highly mystical, It's ecstatic. There's so many different things you can do. I mean, tantrism. So like the left hand, what we would call Satanism as Christians would be like the left-handed path. Well, Hinduism incorporates both of those. So if you want to become enlightened, you can do it the traditional way, the right-handed path, or you can do it the non-traditional way, which is do the exact opposite every cultural convention says, which is what we would understand as Satanism. It's the inversion of Christianity. Or you can do a tantric path. Either way, you can become enlightened. And this idea for, I think, Western Protestant Christians that your destiny is to become God or realize you're God or fully unite with God and elevate your status to something beyond what you currently are is very, very appealing. And Eastern mysticism is built upon this principle that you will eventually transcend once you acquire the right knowledge or the right practice or right understanding. And so for Western people, it's novel, it's unique, it has a foreign mystique to it. And it's a sort of finger at the tradition of Western society itself, saying, look, like this no longer suffices, which I would argue is Western Christianity, Catholicism, and Protestantism, and all the breaks. So evangelicals, Pentecostals, New Age cults like Mormons, all that stuff. All of that, I would argue, is a consequence of the intellectual trajectory of Western civilization in pursuing like this rational definition. So then you get to a point where people want to break out of modernity, which is highly defined. It's defined by science and reason. And then you find, oh, well, I can go like listen to Guru Baba over in, Sri Lanka. And he's like, he can do all this magical, mystical stuff. It's crazy what, and now I can become illuminated. I can become enlightened. I had no idea that this was the true faith, or this is how you actually become something more than you currently are. And I think it's just a real appeal for Western people because it's so foreign, it's colorful, it's unique, it has a aura of mysticism and historicity and tradition to it. And that's one of the funny things. New Agers love the tradition of Hinduism and Buddhist traditions. Talk to them about Christian traditions. They're like, oh my gosh, patriarchy.
Yeah, 100%, man. So yeah, good breakdown, by the way. I didn't know that history about Hinduism, by the way, and that's actually how it came to be. It's interesting. I thought, so Hinduism is an ancient religion though, right? Or is Hinduism a modern construct of the structure of the ancient religion?
Contemporary Hinduism is very different from the historic Vedic religion. They don't even worship the same gods, but it's built on the similar principle. So like the caste system and stuff like this, Brahmins, this is all part of the Vedic tradition. And during the Vedas, they had Agni, the fire god, Soma. So if you guys are interested in like all the psychedelic mystique, is trying to identify Soma. Soma is a god that's described in the Vedas that when you consume him, and it sounds like some type of beverage, you can then become illuminated with his wisdom. Sounds like a psychedelic experience. And so there's been, within the psychedelic community, there's so much literature and speculation. I'm trying to define what Soma is. Soma is it's psilocybin mushrooms. No, it's Amanita muscaria mushrooms. It's this or it. So the Vedic tradition, and this is why you find like the Mithraic cults, because Mithra is mentioned in the Vedas. He's actually a Vedic god. And so then you get cultic devotion, like Mithraism, that was very prominent in like the Roman military, but it really comes out of Iran, which are Indo-European, right? So Indo-Europeans are like all what we consider white people, Europeans, all of them, plus Armenians and Persians, which are everybody in Iran. Those are actually the same group of people based on the language tree. And so Mithraism, which is typically an inebriating cult, often using Amanita muscaria mushrooms, the famous red and white mushrooms that you see in like Super Mario Brothers and stuff like that. They had a cultic practice in which people, the Brahmins, the priests, and before that, the speculation is that they would get high together, kind of like tribal groups do in the Amazonian jungle. But then eventually just the priests did. Only the priests were able to get the knowledge of Soma. And then eventually it's less and less people are able to take the substance until eventually they forget how you actually make the substance and what it is. Okay, digression. But yes, the Vedas, what contemporary Hinduism is an amalgamation. You have the Upanishads, which is like Hindu philosophy. That's much later. And so it's just been building, adding more and more gods, to this pantheon in various ways in which you can demonstrate your devotion or bhakti to a various deity, and then you perform some type of yoga, some type of practice. Usually, although it's a little bit different now, modern India, but historically, enlightenment's only for men, householding men. So if you're a woman, you got to go another cycle of reincarnation. You got to be a good girl so that the next life you can actually be a man, and then you can be a married man, and then your kids can go off, and then once your kids are grown up, now you can become an ascetic. And what you do is basically renounce everything, your family, your possessions. You just have like a loincloth and a bowl. You become a beggar, so you get fed that way. And then if you see those people, they are then pursuing moksha. They are at the end of their life, and they're pursuing enlightenment, so they don't have to reincarnate anymore.
Interesting. All right. Well, I want to eventually get to how you started to really connect the dots and how you started to move more towards orthodoxy. But there are a few different sub ideas that I wanted to talk to you about, because there are some very popular ones. Namely, we've got Terence McKenna. He's a very popular one with his ideas about mushrooms. You've then got, who's that guy who wrote the book about the substance that he thinks that the Greeks used to drink and find Elysium, and
like the Immortality Key.
The Immortality Key.
Yeah, I forget the author's name of that. Yeah, it's a terrible book. I did a review of that book because what he does is he takes
Brian Muraresku. That's
right. Yes,
right.
Muraresku. That's it.
Yeah.
And he takes the work. He's basically building upon. There's a book called Persephone's Quest that was written by, again, R. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hoffman, the man who synthesized LSD, and Carl A.P. Ruck. He's a famous classicist and psychonaut and classicist that focuses on like uncovering ancient psychedelic lore and myths and stuff like that. They wrote this book called Persephone's Quest, which argued that the Kikekion, which was this inebriating beverage at the Eleusinian mysteries. So back in the ancient period, there was these mysteries in Eleusis that anybody who was an anybody was a part of. So Plato, Aristotle, we fully presuppose that they had the Eleusinian mysteries. What little bit we know of these mysteries is that they would go into this room and they would drink a beverage, and this beverage then would allow them to see the mysteries. It's been believed by psychedelic people that this is a psychedelic. The problem is then identifying what psychedelic is. In Persephone's Quest, Albert Hoffman makes the argument that some of the barley that is around that area in Greece, in Eleusis, if you let it grow ergot, which is a sort of fungus, and then you take that fungus and then you curate it and do all these things, that it can become something very similar to LSD. And so they've tried to demonstrate that this is what the Kikekion is. And then Muraresku, what he's doing is taking that entire work of theirs, kind of repackaging it as part of his interpretation and arguing that this is part of a larger and greater mystery of Christianity. And so he like takes a quote from Mount Athos that says, if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. This is a famous quote in front of one of the monasteries. Obviously, from the Orthodox perspective, that is a death to the world. That is a death to possessions. That is a death to typical average, a family man society where, you have a family, you have things to do. These are monastics. And so they are trying to die to the world. And by doing that, when they do die and they face judgment, they won't die because they've already transcended the sort of the trappings and temptations of this side of eternity. And he takes this and means that, look, the people on Mount Athos, they probably did psychedelics. Because he's like, if they're talking about dying, they must have had an ego death. And it's like, what? The word concept fallacy? Because they're talking about death, and your whole book's about the Immortality Key and taking psychedelics, and they label this as a death and rebirth, which the Eleusinian mysteries did. That means what, the monks on Mount Athos? No, that is the dumbest piece of, and he's a lawyer, he's not an actual scholar. Certainly not a religious studies scholar, but that's the dumbest argument you can make. It's a word concept fallacy. Because they're talking about the same thing, it means the same thing. It's so stupid. So I read that book, and there's not a whole lot that's novel there, other than he's synthesizing and bringing together a lot of different authors and theories and putting it together as the Immortality Key. Essentially, psychedelics are the gateway into immortality, which is the New Age, Gnostic, psychedelic worldview. Interestingly, though, Muraresku says he's never done psychedelics. So it's a very weird project for someone to devote multiple years to put that book together for someone who's never even done them. So maybe it's just a personal interest. Maybe he was paid to do it. I have no idea. But it's
I didn't really get the whole idea myself, and I've seen him go on Rogan a few times, and it never really made sense to me. But now, in terms of all of the Gnostic ideas and New Age ideas, it definitely makes a lot more sense. You've also got guys like that are very prominent with this, like Graham Hancock is another one who's very prominent with the idea of the ancient world religions, and that he always shits on Abrahamic religions, saying that they're all just stupid and that the ancients do something that we didn't when they were doing ayahuasca in the jungle. So what's your take on the whole Graham Hancock thing?
Graham Hancock. I mean, there's some stuff that I can agree with. Like I've read Fingerprints of the Gods, and then there's a second book that he did that was going over Göbekli Tepe and some of that stuff. But in regards to questioning the ancient past, I'm all for it. Obviously the latest was it like sonar readings out of Egypt said that there might be, a new mystery under the pyramids. Like there's a huge space, maybe a underground city or something. I think that there's a lot about the ancient world we don't know. And I'm all for a reconceptualization of general historical understanding of the ancient period or ancient monuments, this type of stuff. Certainly there's mysteries there. But yeah, his worldview is all based on a perennial spirituality. So he's married to an Ethiopian woman, which he met when he was exploring the Ark of the Covenant. So, and this is true today. And according, actually, during this Trump administration, there was a claim, at least on X, that a whistleblower from the CIA said that they have a document that claims that the Ethiopians are protecting the actual Ark of the Covenant. So interesting. But the idea is that Ethiopians are ancient Jews, and they're also very old Christians. They're not Orthodox, though. They have a different Christology than we do. So they're not canonically in communion with us. But Egypt or Ethiopia is where Graham Hancock met his wife. And so trying to explore some of these lost mysteries and ancient mysteries, and his spirituality is essentially the same thing that we've already talked about. You take psychedelics, you get into altered states. They allow you to learn more about yourself. Learning about yourself is learning about the universe, because you are the universe. You're a recapitulation of it. Any sort of religion or tradition is man-made. This is their presupposition. So if you buy into a tradition, well, again, they're like the person patting you on the head. Oh, that's nice that comforts you. But, really the truth is that there's a perennial spirituality. And, oh, you haven't experienced it yet? You haven't seen the transforming machine elves? Oh, poor guy. And you're making spiritual claims.
Yeah, it's so true, man. Yeah, Graham Hancock. I mean, I've read his books as well. Magicians of the Gods and these books, and the ancient civilization stuff. Yeah, that's the second one. Yeah, so the ancient civilization stuff is definitely very interesting. And I used to listen to his stuff when he say, "Me and my wife Santa went to the jungle and did some ayahuasca." Every politician should have at least 10 ayahuasca trips before. Okay, I don't know about that. But yeah, there is this real glorification of the old like American civilizations and the things that they were doing, the ayahuasca, and he thinks that they're much more enlightened. But they kind of do gloss over sometimes some of the other things that those cultures were doing in terms of the ritual sacrifice and all of those.
Yeah, they don't like talking about the Aztecs for some reason. So the Aztecs, for those who listening aren't aware, is they had a mushroom ritual. So they incorporated what we believe psilocybin mushrooms or some type of intoxicating mushroom in a ritualistic practice. And they typically did them during the time in which they would sacrifice their prisoners. So if anybody's watched the Mel Gibson movie Apocalypto, where they're on top of the pyramid and then they sacrifice the people, their heads roll down, the blood, like that was a real thing. And then what's more interesting is typically the guy that was sacrificing those people is totally loaded on mushrooms. So talk about a wild experience. And then many people spectating, many people participating, they were loaded on mushrooms. So, I mean, talk about a frenzy. Like you're literally sacrificing people and everybody's tripping balls. Pretty wild stuff. And the reason why this is an inconvenient truth is because many in the New Age and the psychedelic community want to argue that taking psychedelics makes you a more moral and like sympathetic person. Like you are
Peaceful.
more in groove with nature. You're in tune if you take these substances. Well, you can look at the berserkers, for example, in Europe. They would take mushrooms, inebriating mushrooms, before they went to war, so that they would be in a total chaotic or just an inebriated mindset in which they like couldn't feel pain. They would just get into an altered state of consciousness. Well, that sounds very different mushroom use than what we're told by, you know, Graham Hancock or many of the psychedelic people, that this is going to like open your heart and your root chakras, and all of your kundalini blockage is going to be resolved. Well, most of the historical evidence we have on cultures that did this publicly and collectively turn out to be quite violent. So how do you explain that?
Yeah. I mean, there is definitely a lot of that going on, and also a lot of really bad negative experiences that people have when they do these substances as well. I mean, what are some of the worst stories you've heard about people who have gone in and had demonic experiences and really have lost their minds almost when they're doing these substances?
Well, I'll share one experience I had personally, but before I do that, to talk about the demonic attacks, I personally, I'm very thankful. The Lord protected me for some reason. I tripped a lot, and I was really big. I mean, it consumed my life from like 2012, 13 to essentially the day that that last trip that I quit, which actually was an ayahuasca ceremony. That was the last time I did psychedelics, and that ceremony was very weird. I went to an ayahuasca ceremony in Joshua Tree, California, Southern California. It's a national park. We found like one of these. I was with my buddy. He's actually Orthodox now, so both of us have totally turned a new leaf from this period in our life. But my buddy, he had hookups with this shamaness, and he's like, "Hey, there's a retreat, you know, in like a week or two. Do you want to go?" And at that point, I decided. This is where actually right when I was starting the Church of the Eternal Logos, because I was becoming Christian. I was living off the money I was making off this psychedelic YouTube channel. And the most famous philosopher still living, John Searle, he's an analytic philosopher who is tenured at Berkeley forever. I mean, since the 60s. Like, he has famous arguments with Derrida and all these people, the French intellectuals, Foucault and stuff from the 60s and 70s. Well, he got fired while I was there in Berkeley because he asked a woman out to dinner. Now, she was an adult. She was like in her late 40s, and he was in his 70s. And they considered this sexual harassment and fired him after being tenured for like 40 years.
Can't even shoot your shot these days.
Exactly. Can't even shoot your shot, man.
Bullshit.
It's brutal out here. So
Yeah.
when I saw that, I was like, if they can fire John Searle, they can fire anybody for any reason. And it caused me like existential angst, because the whole reason I was pursuing the PhD, again, this is before Orthodoxy, before Church of the Eternal Logos, was I wanted to be like the psychedelic professor with his tweed jacket telling the students, like, you know, my office hours are Tuesday at 2. And that was the whole like dream and goal of getting the higher academic degree. And then I saw that and I was like, holy shit, like everything's falling apart. I got to figure out what to do. And long story short, I go to this ayahuasca ceremony, multiple other factors. It was a breakup. I broke up with my girlfriend at the time. She wasn't really supportive of some of the Orthodox direction I was going in. My mom got a terminal disease. And so all these things happened at the same period. We'll go to this ayahuasca ceremony, and long story short, what came from it was an experience that, well, as soon as the ayahuasca came on, now there's people around me that are crawling around like jaguars. They're speaking like glossolalia, like, again, people call it tongues, but it's gibberish. Oh, are we, Jake's still here? Doesn't look like it. Anyways, I'll keep going.
Sorry,
Okay.
sorry, man.
I was going to keep going because that happened to me.
I get struck down sometimes. So, anyways, sorry. Yeah, the people were speaking in tongues.
Yeah, and there's like women. There's one in particular. She was a very large black girl, and she was thinking that she was a jaguar, and like all this stuff's going on. Now, mind you, I've done, you know, unfortunately, psychedelics multiple times at this point. I'm like, geez, these people, like, I'm not even feeling anything. We all took the same amount so far. Eventually, I took another cup, then another cup. Then it started to come on. And what happened was this realization that what I was so thankful for was the morality of my grandparents and my parents. And I had this experience that this was the most beneficial thing that could be handed down to you as a human being, is to come from a family of moral people trying to do their best. And that this was a huge step forward that other people didn't have, that came from broken homes. So that was the first realization. And then the second one was my YouTube channel, like I said, was me taking audio of Terrence McKenna or Robert Anton Wilson or whoever, and then creating psychedelic graphics and then posting those so people could essentially smoke weed or take drugs and watch these videos and be mesmerized by the visuals while they're hearing these people talk. That was most of the channel. And I had this like conviction that it was time to grow up, that what I was doing was just taking other, like, it was time for me to become my own man. It was time for me to make my own content. And it was tied with like following the logos. This was like the message. And I wrote this down. I actually have a prayer I wrote that night, because I said there's a lot of stuff going on in my life. And I said, you know, God, I just want to know what my purpose is. Like, what am I supposed to do? Again, like with this university thing, I'm losing what the whole career I've spent all these years going towards. And now it's like, I don't think that there's going to be the job safety that I thought there was going to be. And it basically said, like Christ is a carpenter. It's time for me to build something new. And I took that experience, and then the ayahuasca shut off. This was the crazy thing. This is why this was how God confirmed to me that I don't need these things anymore. Is I had 3 cups of ayahuasca and it shut down like in a split second, like just totally back sober, normal. And then the next night, because usually these ceremonies are multiple nights, took 3 more cups. The next night did nothing. And wow. So this is like a sign that it's time to like move beyond this stuff. And then I moved back home to Indiana and created Church of the Eternal Logos and started to create content to try to kind of explain myself in this new position that I had. So there was a question that you asked. It was 2-part, but I forget the second part now.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I probably should have asked you that a little bit earlier about how you got there. But I'm interested to know about what happened next and how you started to connect the dots, particularly after that. But the next part was about like really bad experiences that you've heard of, particularly that other people have had, and why you think those things happen. What exactly you think that they're interacting with in those situations?
I mean, demons. So, I mean, I contacted entities in my altered states and they said things, but I was, you know, for some reason, I just didn't buy into everything that they told me. It was more like, again, it's weird stuff and it's in a totally altered state of consciousness. So do not do drugs, ladies and gentlemen. But you contact real entities and they seem to know things about you and they can say things that are unique to you in your life that it seems very, very personal. And it's very easy for people to like believe that maybe this is a god or this is an advanced intelligence. And I've talked with, and like I said, fortunately for me, I didn't have like any sort of super demonic experience. Only one time that it felt like something really weird happened. And that was when I took him with another person, which they say don't do, right? Don't take psychedelics with people you don't know. Say no to drugs, kids. Anyways, we all got loaded and his energy was off and it was very, very weird. You know, you're all out of your mind. But somebody like your mate, Tom, I did a stream back with him. And he sounded like at the last conversation we had, it was right before we got married, that he was kind of looking into Orthodoxy. And we had a conversation on my channel and he mentioned to me that what was bringing him to Christ, and again, I wish him and his wife well. I haven't talked with him in a while, so I don't know where he is in regards to spirituality or what he's into right now. But he told me on my channel that he did an ayahuasca ceremony in Peru, and this was, I think at that point, it was like a year before this conversation we had. And he said that the shaman, once they got loaded, he could see that the shaman was like very mischievous. Looked like he was trying to hit on the women. Trying to sleep with women while everybody was high on ayahuasca. And he said he started to feel like this presence of this demon coming. And for the first time in his life, he called out to Jesus. And that was the only thing that began to like slow the chaos that was happening around him and like the feeling of these entities coming forth. And this isn't unique to Tom. I've talked with so many people that this is one of the catalysts for them to begin to look in Christ. And usually they then go to like a Protestant church. And then they start looking on the online, they start seeing the online theology debates, and then they start looking in church history. And eventually this process leads someone to like looking at Orthodoxy. And that's how I come in contact with them and talk with them. And they've told me at least 8 to 9 people I've talked to specifically said, yeah, crazy shit was happening. And I called out to Jesus Christ for the first time, and I wasn't really a believer, and everything started to calm down. And I became convinced that there is power in his name. And they got this because of what was happening in their psychedelic experience, which then when they come down, they start trying to learn a little bit more about who Jesus Christ is. So I believe what's happening is, and like I said, I had a positive experience. Was it a demon that told me to no longer do, build my YouTube channel, follow my path into orthodoxy and no longer do drugs? No, I think that was God. And so it's not black and white. God can be anywhere. He's way more powerful than the demons. But I believe if I were to take psychedelics right now, I would probably have a terrible experience because of where I'm at, what I promote, what I'm trying to do. And if I sort of fall back on all that and I got loaded in some ayahuasca ceremony, I would imagine that I'd probably be attacked by these entities for, in my personal belief, trying to lead people away from it. So I believe that it's real spiritual warfare. And the problem with psychedelic people is there's like no negative side or very little negative side to spiritual warfare. It's all like spiritual gatherings. It's like spiritual warfare is really just we get together with all these entities in psychonaut space, and we sing Kumbaya and we learn from each other, and it teaches us things. But when you ask them, like, well, what if there's demons? Like, what if there's actual entities you can contact that are evil? And they don't really have because they don't have an objective morality, they don't really have a response for the existence of evil. And therefore, they don't have a response for noetic entities or demons that could be actually mischievous and trying to lead you towards destruction.
Have you ever read Screw Tape Letters?
I have not.
By C.S. Lewis. It's a book basically where there's like a senior demon and he's speaking to his apprentice demon. And he is telling him all the things that he has to do in order to basically capture the spirit and the soul of the human person. And this senior demon is very experienced and knows exactly how to do it. So it reminds me of that when we talk about this, because if you were the senior demon and you were an expert at this, what would you do? You would make all of the spiritual gatherings very loving and tell people what they want to hear and massage their ego and make them feel like they're spiritually enlightened to lead them as far away from the truth and as far away from God as possible, right?
Exactly. And develop some type of addiction, which could be sex, could be, and that's where I've seen just psychedelics, looking at my time in the psychedelic community, seeing people men becoming homosexual, thinking that they're homosexual based on like these weird psychedelic experiences. I've seen, orgies, people become addicted to like the party side of the psychonaut sphere. It's like, yeah, we do, LSD and mushrooms, but obviously you can't do that stuff every day. So what do? Well, we like ketamine and we like a little cocaine here and there. And then you start to see like they're really in a drug scene. And then all of a sudden multiple people I used to know, haven't talked with them in years, but that they're big into the psychonaut, the rave culture, going to jam bands and raves across the nation, EDM music. And it's like, it looks like they're killing themselves. Last time I saw a photo, I mean, they're like, looks like they're dying. And it's because they're addicted
I see a lot
like
of these
drugs.
people as well.
Yeah,
I've seen so many of the people go down this path of going to all of the raves and being wearing all the colorful clothes and having weird colorful umbrellas and stuff, going to these different psych raves, or what is it called? Psytrance and all this sort of shit. But yeah, it does happen. And I often talk in this channel about what we call, I don't know if you've heard of the sneaky fucker strategy.
No, what's that?
Basically what it is, and it's a zoological term, so it's not even what I call it, but it's basically where various different animals they have a mating strategy where the males who have a more feminine phenotype will try and actually blend in with the female animals like pufferfish and a few other different animals to try and bypass the more alpha phenotype males so that they can mate with the females. And I think that this whole spiritual sort of psychedelic scene is a perfect breeding ground for these sneaky fuckers in the human realm, because they can blend in with the women and wear the colorful clothes and long hair, and they can mate with all the females in these, love-filled spiritual orgies. I think it can be a great mating strategy for the sneaky fuckers.
No, I totally agree. That's a great point. And what psychedelics do, especially if you start doing them regularly, and say, like, I smoked weed every day back then. So I had a terrible marijuana habit, addiction, you could call it, from like basically 19 years old till 30 years old when I became, got into Orthodoxy. So I I was like a habitual daily weed smoker. And what that stuff does is it interiorizes your awareness. And so, yeah, if you did it once in a while, maybe you become aware of an emotion or something you didn't know because it alters your conscious. Okay. But when you do it regularly, it really does feminize you because you're moving your awareness as a man more and more into the interiority of yourself. And to be masculine is really to be engaging with the world in the exterior. Obviously we're rational. I'm not saying you don't have an internal life. I mean, that's not what I'm saying, but just like your focus, like the way you engage with society, you're more emotional, you're more into your feelings. This is a feminization. Like you don't go to, Burning Man and see a bunch of alpha males. You may see some. I would say they're feminized probably due to some type of addiction, which I view as a form of limiting of your full masculinity. Could be anything. We can be addicted to many things, but anything you're addicted to, at least from an Orthodox perspective, is a chain. It's a chain holding you down. And I would argue that those chains are like forcing you into this transgender spiritual paradigm where it's like blending the fundamental nature of identity. And this is, I would argue, the problem facing modernity right now. And this is where we see the rhetoric of the woke right and the woke left is how do we deal with modernity? Because modernity, really everything that's happened since the Enlightenment, is defined by a pursuit towards utopia, continual linear progress, and the way we get there is through science and reason. So these 4 pillars, and then you have democracy. You can add democracy to that. So those are like the 5 pillars of what we call modernity, the modern period. Postmodernism is saying, hey, your idea that all of this is going to lead into a worldly utopia has failed in the 20th century. More people died in the 20th century than any other period. So this narrative of modernity is false. And they're right. They're absolutely right. And as an Orthodox Christian, my argument is, and Christos Yanaros, he's dead now, but he was a famous Orthodox philosopher. He argued in a book called Postmodern Metaphysics that the postmodern period is really a period in which Orthodoxy can thrive, because Orthodoxy is a pre-modern worldview. So again, ours is about like participation with God, morality, tradition, church, historical identity. So your ancestral identity, like what people do you come from? Like this is all part of the pre-modern worldview. Modernism has destroyed all this. Modernism in those 5 pillars assumes that you're an atomized individual that could be replaced. You're a cog in a machine. That was the That's the anthropological presupposition of modernity. And then pre-modernism is saying no. So postmodernism and pre-modernism are levying the same criticisms at modernity. The difference is pre-modernism allows for all the subjective experience that postmodernism wants. Our epistemology as Orthodox begins with revelation of God. Second is personal faith and subjective experience, because that's how you engage with God. Underneath that is rationalism. And all that is together. So we don't separate those things. They're united together, but there's a hierarchy of importance. And postmodernism does away with all type of truth claims, right? So it does away with objective morality, objective epistemology, objective metaphysics. Pre-modernism is saying, look, you can value your subjective experience because we do. That's how we engage with God. Your personal experience is actually really important. And yes, you can come to epistemic knowledge through your personal experience. Difference is all of this is based on an actual coherent, objective world that God created. And so I would argue when you look at the Jordan Peterson and the James Lindsay discussion on the woke right, it's all about Western civilization. Well, what are they talking about? They're talking about modernity. They're talking about science, reason, democracy leading towards global utopia. And in that sense, you see, that's where we're always talking about there's like a false dialectic between the right and left. Yes, because they're in the same paradigm, historical paradigm of thought. They just, some wants to cut off the children's genitals, the other people don't. But modernism is and so when I see the Trump administration and the coalescence of the tech oligarchs, and then you have the Zionist, and then you have the MAGA movement, to me, what that represents is like the last attempt to maintain and perpetuate the modernist project. And so this is why James Lindsay then is so threatened by these people on the right who are talking about identity. They're talking about ancestors. They're talking about God. They're talking about like dying for a cause. These people, and again, it's another word concept fallacy, because the right is talking about identity. and the left is talking about identity, it must be the exact same thing. Well, no, nobody.
Yeah, I actually went through this on stream.
Theory.
I went through this on stream yesterday. It's interesting that you bring this up because we went through the whole James Lindsay thing on stream yesterday, and because he was on some news program talking to the people, and he was trying to define the woke right, and he was doing a lot of academic speak, and he was saying, well, you know, the woke right and the woke left, they both have their intellectual lineage in Marxism and in Hegel and these types of people, and I just thought it was so ridiculous because he's looking at two different ideologies and two different worldviews that, yes, they might view some same descriptors about reality, but they have completely different prescriptions about what to do about that. So he's just completely trying to he's trying to basically cope. If we want to use internet speak, he's coping about his little woke right thing, and he's trying to say that these people have the same ideology and worldview when really they don't whatsoever. They can I can recognize similar descriptive realities to Marx, for example, and I can read his work and say some of the descriptors that he talks about are correct, but the prescriptions are completely different.
Exactly. And that's where you think somebody who touts themselves as such a highly accredited intellectual would be able to see some of these differences. I mean, this is why the right wing, where's all the energy going? Orthodoxy, trad Catholicism, and paganism. What do those three have in common? It's pre-modernity. And I don't think the young people who are moving to these are conscious of it. This isn't a conscious thing. They're not sitting there thinking, man, these 5 pillars of modernity seem to not become true. I think I'm going to go trad Catholic. No, this is that young people are searching for identity, because if you're a young man in Western civilization, your chances of buying a house are slim. Your chances of finding your wife are slim. So everything that you've been promised by your boomer parents, that things are going to get better. Again, this modernism, everything gets better every generation, is very abruptly aware that things are not getting better. They're getting worse. So how do I get out of this position? Do I just go work, my 9 to 5 for the rest of my life? And people are like looking for something, meaning and identity. And the only way that meaning and identity is going to come is through something transcendent. Now, some people adopt Nordic paganism, which seems dumb to me, but it's still the same impetus of what causing people to move in this direction. And so why people are fleeing, both the left and the right are fleeing modernity. And so this like centrist, Zionist, Silicon Valley, MAGA, all this stuff together is the center. And people are trying to find an escape for something new, something novel, something different than modernity. And I think that's what's happening. And so even Peterson and Lindsay in their conversation, they keep talking about how we're classical liberals. What does classical liberal mean? Enlightenment period thought. So I think what they're threatened by is, and just as like Curtis Yarvin, for example, he's talking about monarchy. Now, Curtis Yarvin is arguing for monarchy based on the efficiency of corporations. However, monarchy is explicitly an anti-modern political formation. Now, of course, all the capitalism, all they're structured in a sort of monarchical fashion, but our governments are democracy or democratic republics. Everybody wants to talk about, we're a democratic republic. America's a republic. All of this is an Enlightenment thought. And so, from the beginning of the French Revolution to World War I, that is a movement to destroy European monarchy. And then by then it's over. I mean, we have like a faux monarchy in Britain, but it means nothing. And so just Curtis Yarvin, again, coming out of Silicon Valley, very much a sort of techie, very modern guy, but he's saying, hey, if we just base it on efficiency, we should probably go back to a monarchical system. And the reason why that has fervor amongst the young people is because, holy shit, we could have monarchy? Like, I never knew that was an option, because it's pre-modern. Like, all you have is, in modernity, you have parliament, democracies, republics, fascism, communism. These are basically your modernist political structures you can choose from. Well, what if we want a religious monarchy? Oh, the entire history of Western civilization was about destroying those things so that we could have what we have now.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't really thought about it from this perspective, actually, when you look at it as pre-modern. So would you define pre-modern as pre-French Revolution or pre-French Revolution times? Yeah,
you could say that. I mean,
yeah.
And that's where, one of the PhDs I was on my dissertation committee, she's a trad Catholic. She's an Aristotelian philosopher that really knows her stuff on neuroscience. So a lot of her philosophy has to do with like philosophy of mind, theory of personhood. And my dissertation, which was on comparing transhumanism as a form of technological deification to orthodoxy, and talking about us being in a post-secular period. Post-secularism is the breakdown between the secular and the religious. So, at least, and this is academic jargon, forgive me if this is boring, but a common theory right now is that we live in a post-secular society. That means that secular ideologies function as religious narratives for individuals. And I think this is incredibly insightful. Because when you then see like the BLM movement or what happened after George Floyd, the post-secular theory is arguing that actually because people have become so overly rational and like lack mysticism, they express emotionally their sort of mystical desire through secular ideologies. And that's exactly what we're seeing in society. And so my argument is that in a post-secular society, you have transhumanism. If you're talking about deification, you have transhumanism. And then which I argued in my dissertation, comes out of Western Christianity specifically. And then you have pre-modern Christianity, which is Orthodoxy, which has a totally different understanding of how you become deified. And the Catholic scholar, when she was talking about like similarities or a little bit too strong critiques of Catholicism from my perspective, I said, well, the reason I used Orthodoxy most explicitly is because I think you have a real tough time arguing that the contemporary Catholic Church is pre-modern. And she thought about it. She's like, yeah, you're right. I mean, they have Vatican I, now they have Vatican II. So even if you are wanting to be a trad cath, it's not a pre-modern church anymore. Now, if it was 1700s, yeah, you could argue absolutely. Even after Vatican I, I think to some degree you could make that argument. Now in 2025, can you argue the Catholic Church is a pre-modern worldview? I mean, it has aspects of it, but it also has very much syncretic post-Vatican II, like perennial worldly aspects in it built in now. And so the only option within Christianity, if you want to return back to pre-modernity, before all these intellectual baggage that got going after 1054, your only option is like Eastern Orthodoxy, Oriental Orthodoxy, or some type of Nestorian Christian faith, because those are the only options you have if you're going to be Christian.
Yeah, I think
you're going to be pre-modern.
we're seeing this not only in the Western world, but actually globally, that people are looking more and more towards tradition than they previously have. Even in Europe, we're seeing elements of this in various different countries, having parties rise up that are a little bit more sort of right-wing and looking more towards the tradition of the country and recognizing that people have a tradition that they care about and that they love. So it's interesting when you put it this way, in the sense that you've got the pre-modern and then the modern experiment, which is the whole Western experiment that's been happening. And more recently, the declaration of the end of history by guys like Francis Fukuyama, who say that liberal democracy is it's the end of history, and every single country around the world is going to eventually realize the dream of just being a liberal democracy. And then you've got postmodernism, which is, I think Gad Saad, interestingly and funnily, calls it intellectual terrorism that flies planes of bullshit into our edifices of reason. But he's specifically talking about the prescriptions that they give, or the idea that there are no universal truths. Right. And if I'm saying it correctly, postmodernism is kind of like a nihilist philosophy in a way, because they look at the whole entire philosophical experiment the whole entire history of philosophy and say, well, it got us here to the West, to the 20th century, where people died by the millions. So basically everything is just bullshit, right?
Essentially. So postmodernism is responding to, so after Kant, so Immanuel Kant, this was a major turning point in philosophy. His critique of pure reason, what he's arguing, to break it down, it's kind of difficult to read if you're not familiar with his words and categories, but to dumb it down, essentially the exterior world is totally unknowable. Now we are having sense impressions of it, and I can sense and I can come to knowledge claims based on how it's impressing itself on my a priori synthetic categories. So he believes that we have 12 categories essentially in our mind, and that physical reality pushes up against those categories, and that is what we experience as reality. But if that's the case, then the exterior world is not entirely knowable. And in fact, there's no way to fully know it, because you can't engage with it until it filters through your 12 categories. And so Kant is then calling into question the total knowability of the external world. And before him, you had the rationalists like Descartes saying, look, I can just sit here with my eyes closed and use reason, much more of a Platonic approach, and just come to absolute universal knowledge claims. And then you have somebody like Bacon, Francis Bacon, saying, no, actually, the way we come to knowledge is through the utility of science. We have to measure and take averages of everything. That's how we come to the exterior world. And then Kant saying, well, both of those are problematic. He's saying the metaphysics of rationalism are called into question. He's saying the empiricism of science is called into question. What can we really know? And then he argues that it's through morality that we can come to total knowledge claims. And he actually argues for God that way. Okay. What happens after Kant is the methodology for how we come to know something splits. And it still defines philosophy today. You have the analytic tradition, the Anglo-American tradition, which is like pro-science. And then you have the continental tradition, which is the European tradition of philosophy, which privileges phenomenology. So, and this is why you get Hegel after Kant, and you get all that, what we call German idealism, is they argue, okay, so if there's no way to know the exterior world, what can we fully know? And what the Hegelians and really the German idealists after Kant say, well, we can know our own mind. We can know how we experience it. If Kant's right and we can't know the exterior world, then we need to study the 12 categories and the experiences that occur within it. And so this is where you get Hegel saying, well, you know, the Hegelian dialectic and this the movement between your self-awareness and everything that's not you is a dialectic leading to the emergence of the Geist. Okay, so these two schools then continue on, and you have 19th century British empiricism, which then falls and turns into logical positivism with this idea, okay, well, we're going to come to full knowledge claims now through logical semantic statements. This is what logical positivism is. If we use logic to the highest degree in our sentences, then we can only make truthful claims, and that's the most that we could know. And then somebody says, did you use empiricism to justify logic? How do you know? And then it's like, oh, fuck. It's the presuppositional critique, right? So they presupposed everything to have logical positivism. And so that project falls apart. And so what happens in the mid 20th century is the postmodernists, is mostly coming out of the French tradition, say, all right, so there's no universal claims, because whether we study our personal experience or we study the exterior world, there is no universal meta-narrative. Therefore, you have like the Sartrean existentialism where, you know, you just kind of make your own truth. And this turns into Derrida and Foucault is saying, yeah, it's the postmodern turn, is that there is no universal meta-narrative. All you have is your own experience. We can't even come to universal claims about people's experiences. So postmodernists say you can't even make a meta-narrative about people's experience of the color blue or something, you know, whatever it is. So all we have then is our individual personal experiences. And where they get it right is, I would argue their objection to modernity is correct. But like you said, their response to it, their prescription to the problem of modernity is total relativism. How can you build anything from there? And so they want to restart the philosophical project based on relativism and then allow, I guess, cultural conventions to emerge and compete. And pre-modernism is saying, guys, like, why don't we just return back to, like, there's a fork in the road and we went one way and that road is still forking multiple ways and it's not working. Why don't we just go back to the road earlier and just take a more traditional approach to society and structure? And I think that's what Orthodoxy in a pre-modern worldview is offering. And it offers a return back to the metaphysics that Kant destroyed. I mean, after Immanuel Kant, he was an incredibly smart guy, but after Immanuel Kant, there is no more metaphysics. And that's why there's still people that study metaphysics, Catholics, you know, religious institutions, even some secular scholars, but there's no way for them to justify those metaphysics anymore based on their own categories, because you need God. And so if you don't believe in God, it's really going to hard to do philosophy and talk about metaphysics anymore. And so it's like,
interesting. I've never heard about the postmodernist worldview from this perspective, but it's really, really interesting to hear. So would I be correct in saying that the pre-modernists and the postmodernists, they have a similar view of various different descriptors, but they have a disagreement about both presuppositions and prescriptions?
Yes, that's very fair. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's where Yanaros, in his argument in postmodern metaphysics, he believes in the Western world, the postmodern turn. Now he's writing this in the 80s. He sees that this is going to be a great thing for Westerners to adopt orthodoxy, because the postmodern turn means that people are trying to find meaning now in personal experience. And if that's the case, he's saying once they come to the Orthodox Church, they'll find the mysticism they're looking for. And then it gives them the entire metaphysical paradigm of objectivity that the Western tradition no longer has. And so
Right.
he believes that the postmodern term is actually a point in which Orthodoxy is going to excel. And so you could make an argument that that's exactly what's occurring since 2020, is that people were faced with death. It caused existential questions about life and purpose. And they started trying to find meaning through personal experience. Some of them lead to Burning Man. Some of them lead to an Orthodox church. And those that find the Orthodox church are finding something as a man that you can die for, a history of people, a community, women that adopt your same values, and something that is transcendent, something that actually can call your life forward. And it's not you just making it based on, money or status or material objects.
Yeah. Okay. So interesting. By the way, guys, everyone who's sending super chats, we are going to read them towards the end. And so if you have any questions for DPH, then get them in there and we'll talk about them towards the end. I appreciate all the support. So, I mean, this kind of is a good segue into our next part where I wanted to talk about how you really started to piece the dots and how it started to come to Orthodoxy. By the way, I didn't actually ask you at the start. Do you have a hard out for this?
No.
Okay, great. So I'm going to keep you here all day.
Well, yeah, it's your morning, my evening. So
yeah, great. All right. So we move into the idea of how you started to come into Orthodoxy, but you brought up something really interesting before about the whole pandemic time and how people started to be confronted with death. And it sort of speaks to something about the human condition where we have it written on our hearts that death is something that we obviously have to contend with as human beings, and being confronted with that, like a lot of people were during that time during the pandemic, causes people to ask various different questions about the metaphysical nature of being and of the world. So was that something that sort of triggered you to start exploring more questions about Orthodoxy, and how did the idea of the metaphysical world and of death really sort of, what was that tension like for you when you were talking about the New Age spirituality and then Orthodoxy, particularly with the metaphysics?
For me, what caused me to start questioning like deeper philosophical questions regarding my New Age worldview was, obviously I was in Berkeley. I was in a PhD program. I'm a white male. I'm heterosexual, fairly masculine, and I come from the Midwest. So let's just say my other classmates weren't too fond of me before I even said a word, because it was so progressive. So we would have like PhD courses, and you're supposed to be able like you have a reading and then you can debate it with other, but the university is so sanitized. Like I remember there was a Muslim chick in our group, and her interpretation of our reading was so superficial. And then I critiqued it. And then after class, the teacher's like, "Hey, you can't talk to other students." And I wasn't even like vulgar or anything. My point was like that, like, this isn't what we read. Like, this is clearly what he's saying. He's part of this tradition. Like, this is the system, the philosophy, like what? And they're like, "No, you can't do that. Like, we're all students, and that compromises our learning environment." It's like, I thought we're PhD. Like, I thought we're all trying to be doctors here. I thought that's the point of like higher academia. So, I was in that worldview. And like I said, I was pro psychedelic New Age. And I had during that Orthodox course, again, a total non-believer, but really like reading this stuff. I mean, I'm reading like church fathers, I'm reading theologians, and it's like kind of dry when it talks about spirituality because I'm a non-believer. So they're talking about Christ, like, okay. But then when they're talking about philosophy and theology and the worldview, it's like, whoa, this thing is cool. I've never seen like Christianity be presented this way. And then that led to like that summer of me watching like Father Josiah Trenum videos, still a non-believer. And I remember I watched a video by Jay Dyer on logos and numbers. And one of the things that I had been questioning myself, I forget what exactly caused me to question this, but it was objective morality. I remember actually now. It was a pride parade in Berkeley. This was the same time that Ben Shapiro and Milo Yiannopoulos had come to Berkeley, and like a professor had hit a kid with a bike lock. It was a huge thing in 2017. And I was there. And they had a pride parade like a month or two after that. And there was a MAPS group, minor attracted persons, marching in the, and
what?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. And I had seen people, maybe they weren't officially part of the parade, but I saw the banners. I saw what they were talking about. And when I saw that, I was so revolted against it. Like, I couldn't believe like there was promotion of pedophilia, like out in the open, like on the streets. And I thought, God, that is disgusting. Like, what is wrong with these people? But that weighed on me, especially with my new age psychedelic stuff. Is like, how do I actually justify why they're wrong? I had just totally assumed throughout my entire 20s my Protestant morality, my general Protestant Christian morality. And then I began to question that. And then I realized that within my own spiritual paradigm, it's very difficult for me to justify it. And then I kind of adopted, like in this middle period between the Orthodox course and actually becoming Orthodox, like, well, logos, like a cosmic mind, like panpsychism, that's kind of the basis for objectivity. And just watching a couple Dyer clips early in my journey and him just talking about some of the shortcomings of things that I believed in, I was like, shit, that actually makes a lot of fucking sense. And I was like, man, okay.
I've had a lot of those moments watching Jay's channel.
And then, yeah, so that caused me, then that was probably like I said, 2017, 2018. And then once I came to the conclusion that there has to be a God, and then with, like I said, that LSD experience about how God became man, he is the logos, he is the word, he is the metaphysical basis for all geometry, sacred geometry, cymatics, the fractal patterns within sound itself. It's like, oh, that, all of that, everything I liked about the New Age, that's Jesus Christ. Holy crap. I had no, and so that was what, like, the experience. And that was the thing that just from that point forward, I began to pray at night. And it was just it was a slow journey. It was about a year journey, but that journey eventually just continued to blossom and bring me to Orthodoxy. So the metaphysics stuff really had to do with theodicy, the explanation of evil. I saw people promoting pedophilia in Berkeley. I saw people did not care and in fact supported it as well. I was revolted by it, and it caused me to figure out, how can I actually say that that's objectively wrong? And then and that series of events then eventually takes you, all of a sudden you're in an Orthodox liturgy.
Yeah. So interesting, man. I mean, this is where I find yours and Jay's arguments really, really interesting, particularly when you're talking about the transcendental argument and how you guys debate from the presuppositional standpoint. Talk a little bit about that. And when you're talking about objective morality and why it actually is hard to justify, because I've had this conversation with normies before. When they talk about morality, they'll say, yeah, it's bad because it's bad. And I'll say, yeah, but how can you actually justify that? And it's just a quick story. There was a Bible studies happening here in Bali a few months back, and I went to it, and it was basically just a bunch of Protestant chicks talking about how, Jesus walked on water. And so I was sitting there kind of quiet, and then I had to interrupt and be like, okay, guys, raise your hand here if you've been a lifelong believer in Christ. One person raised their hand. And I said, raise your hand if you aren't a Christian at all and you're here because you're just kind of curious. And literally, like, everyone raised their hand. So then I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to throw a cat amongst the pigeons here. So then I started to ask about morality, and we got into the topic of morality. And I said to the atheists that you have no justification for your morality. And they started saying, what do you mean? Because when you say this to atheists, generally speaking, they're going to have a visceral reaction where they say, well, that you're saying that I can't be a moral person. No, I'm not saying that you can't be a moral person. I'm saying that you have no actual justification for your morality. And this actually all comes from a Christian worldview. And we got into this argument about it. But it was interesting because I'd been watching a bunch of yours and Jay's debates and videos, and it just makes total sense to me, the idea, the presuppositional argument that people actually can't really argue for this objective morality. So talk a bit about that and what you mean when you say that they can't argue for an objective morality.
So if you're an atheist, your worldview is built on the presupposition that the entire universe came out of nothing at a single point of a single instance for no particular reason. And that cosmic evolution has been continuing, and that eventually that led to bacteria, like the magical pond theory, and then it all moves forward. Well, if that is true, it argues that the only thing that exists is physical. And most of them would agree with that once you go there. If that is true, it also argues that everything that is physical is continually changing. And they'd say, well, yeah, it's evolving. It's part of evolution. Okay. If that is true, then you doing empirical methods on a movable material matter that you say is evolving, how can you come to a universal truth claim? And they're like, oh, well, science, clearly it's science. Well, based on your own presuppositions. And then you can push it further by saying, okay, do you believe that 2 + 2 = 4? Do you believe in the law of non-contradiction? Do you believe in the law of excluded middle? And they're like, well, yeah, that's how we do mathematics. Okay, number theory. Empirically justify that for me. Oh, well, I can't. That's not a material thing that I can measure. Okay, then how does it exist? Well, they're mental constructs. Okay, if they're mental constructs, are they universal? Is 2 + 2 = 4 always true? And then they're in a position, because now they're appealing to a universal truth that is not dependent on historical context or time. And they have no basis for anything non-physical to be static, right? So Kant calls these the transcendental categories. And that's where people kind of fallaciously say, well, the tag argument, that's a Kantian argument. No, it's not. Kant just highlights that metaphysical categories, which he's arguing are these a priori categories in your mind. That's where he's putting metaphysics. He's moving it from the external to the mind. They have no basis for any sort of metaphysical structure.
Wait, so just quickly, so Kant is sort of saying that the transcendental categories are basically like factory settings?
Yes.
Okay.
Because you can't know it out there. How can you? His argument is how can you know the metaphysics of reality? Because how are you going to do it? Are you going to go through just pure reason? Okay, so the critique of pure reason. Are you going to go through the Cartesian method? Or are you going to go through empiricism, the Baconian method? How are you going to know what the metaphysics are? Now, again, for an Orthodox, we say, well, it's revealed already. Come on, bro. Like we don't need to figure all this stuff out. It's revealed within Scripture. It's part of this larger structure. But he, working out the Enlightenment thought, again, constantly this idea of progress and using reason and science to progress, he basically destroys the presuppositions, because it's not like Descartes or Bacon were trying to preserve Christian metaphysics. It's just they were working off a presupposition. And Kant's the first one to say, look, guys, you're presupposing all these things and you can't even prove them. That's really what he's doing. And he's moving metaphysics. So Aristotelian 10 categories, the metaphysical categories, Aristotle has 10. Kant takes those and adds 2 more categories and says they're a priori, they're in your mind. They're part of the experience. That's why we can see them when we experience reality. We can see the categories, but he's saying the categories aren't out there, they're in here. And connecting this back with tag, if you're talking with an atheist, the question is like, where do the laws of logic come from? And how, as an atheist empiricist, how can you demonstrate to me that they're unchanging? And their only way to go, if you're using the tag, is to say, okay, well, I concede. Yeah, I can't prove the existence of logic. But you can't prove, you have to presuppose the existence of God. So I'm just going to presuppose the thousands of things that I presuppose, and now we're even. And then the move is, there's 2 theories of truth. There's correspondence, meaning like, this is a bottle of Topo Chico water. The observation corresponds, the semantic description corresponds with the observation. And then you have coherency theory of truth. And this is what tag is built off of. And this is where the critiques of like logical positivism come from. Is that logical positivism presupposes logic through truth statements and empiricism, but can't actually use empiricism to define logic. So it presupposes something that the world, and what the critique is there is that that's true for everybody. Everybody is presupposing a beginning point that then they can build a worldview off of. What the tag argument is saying is, well, why presuppose 1,000 different things? I just presuppose that God is real and that God revealed himself. And then I can construct a coherent model that fulfills the desires of ethics, metaphysics, epistemology in a coherent fashion. And so when we're talking about paradigms, no paradigm is proven through empiricism. The only way you can argue or debate a paradigm is through a coherency theory, which means how many things do you presuppose? How many things do I presuppose? Which model is more coherent? Okay, and what we're doing is saying our Orthodox model is way more coherent. That's why we win. That's essentially the game that's being played there. And so if you're dealing with an atheist, they can never win that debate. The only thing they can do is say, yeah, I don't believe in objective truth. Truth is a cultural convention based on empirical inductive methods, and it could change in the future. And if they do that, then they conceded the debate, because that's relativism, because debate is based on logic. So debate is lost through logical fallacies. So if knowledge and truth is inductive empirical method through the observation of material that's constantly changing, now we have, like, what standards are we even talking about this debate? So you lose the debate that way. And then if they just say, okay, fine, I'm going to presuppose 1,000 different things. You presuppose you're Sky Daddy. It's like, okay, well, I still win because I presuppose one thing. You presuppose 1,000 different things you have no account for. And so that's kind of, go ahead.
Yeah, I always find the arguments about logic and how logic is actually something that is a transcendental category, as in it transcends. It transcends our own sort of human experience. It would exist absent the human consciousness,
exactly.
right?
And that's the Orthodox approach. We would say, well, Orthodox logic exists before the creation of the universe because it's
Can
built
we say
logically.
the same thing? Could we say the same thing about love? Because sometimes when I'm talking to normies and when I'm on a date with a girl and I'm speaking about these categories, for example, I'll say, well, how do you know that what's love? How do you know that you love somebody? Is it because you find them attractive? Is it because you find them really funny? Because those things you can isolate into various different meta categories. But what is actually love in itself? You can't really isolate it. You can't really describe it. I've heard it defined as to will the good of the other. But then you can sort of just find that into a meta category in and of itself. So love is one of those things that we always presuppose, but we kind of just know, as in we can intuit love, right?
So in regards to the pre-existence of love, we'd absolutely say that love pre-exists the universe. So from an Orthodox standpoint, and this is a huge difference within our paradigm versus any other, well, Christian religion, but you could argue with most other world religions, is there's a fundamental question of, do you directly engage with God? And Orthodoxy takes the explicit yes on this. And we have a division called the energy essence distinction. The essence of God is unknowable. It's totally transcendent. The only thing we know about the essence of God is that it's three persons with one essence, and that's built on revelation. And we know that the Father is the arche. He's the monarchical head of the Trinity. That's all we can really say about that, like positive claims about it. So then the question is, and this is where like Catholic Thomistic theology says you don't participate directly with God. You participate with an analogy, the analogia. And that, like, the beatific vision of paradise for the Catholics is a vision of God, but it's not God. And Orthodox, the theology of the first millennium was like, no. The whole point of being a Christian is that you embody these uncreated energies like love, truth, logic, reason, honor, glory, compassion, mercy, long-suffering. All these things we'd say are positive energies, and they're the only things that exist. And it's just like the law of thermodynamics. When we look at a spectrum between hot and cold, the only thing that's being measured is thermodynamic energy. So if there's a lot of energy, it's really hot. If there's hardly any energy, it's almost freezing. So therefore, cold has no positive existence. Cold is just a term. It's a filler term to describe the absence of energy. And that's how Orthodox, we understand evil. So sin, everything that's the opposite of these uncreated energies, is a term used to describe a spectrum of energy, and where it's the lack of, it's the opposite. So we would say evil has no ontological existence. God is not battling the devil. The devil's already doomed based on the absence of any energy. And if you don't have uncreated energy, how can you live forever? So for the Orthodox Christian, the goal is to constantly participate in these uncreated energies of God. And they're in the sacraments, they're in marriage, they're in the Eucharist, they're in the church community. So it's an incredibly mystical paradigm in which we're constantly choosing to whether we engage with God or say I do something instead of love I hate. There's the absence of God's energy, and therefore that energy then is displaced within me, right? The amount of divine energy is lost through sin. This is why sin is death. And if you have no divine energy in you when you die, what do you think is going to happen to you? But if you're filled with divine energy, when you die, clearly you can't die because that energy doesn't die. So that's what's so interesting is, like, if you take the law of thermodynamics, it actually applies to the Orthodox paradigm of how we relate and engage with God's energies. So this energy essence distinction is huge because we're saying that you actually do participate with the living God, and they are a person, three persons. And so connecting all this back with the question of love is, we would argue that's why we can describe the Trinity as love, because love necessitates an other. How Allah love if there's nothing but himself? And this is the problem with the Neoplatonic framework. And Neoplatonism is a fancy term, just assuming that their worldview is a dot in a circle with concentric circles. And the dot is the one, everything is a concentric circle moving out. We are on the very fringe of these circles. This is physical reality. And so then you have to perform these processes, theurgy, magic, to move back knowledge, to move back towards the one. We would argue if that's the case and God is one and only one, like not three persons, how can he love? Because who would he love? Love necessitates something other than yourself. And so we would argue, well, clearly a Godhead that's one essence and three persons, three being the first number of multiplicity, our God is one in many. There's nothing you can say about the Trinity that God isn't.
Right. Okay.
Meaning that all dialectical categories.
This is an interesting one. I want you to help me develop this argument a little bit, because when people say I love myself, and the idea, and you get this whole modern woman idea of love yourself, love yourself, love yourself. Well, I think that is actually not love, because you can't necessarily love yourself. To love, like you said before, it necessitates the other. So help me articulate and develop this argument that self-love is actually not a form of love at all.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Now, obviously, harming yourself or not caring for yourself at all would also be a sin, because your body's a temple. So there's a line here. It's never one or the other. It's both and for Orthodox. But
this is why it's a bit of a tricky one to articulate, right? Because it's like you don't want to disrespect yourself. Right. But you make a perfect point. The obsession, especially like the self-help world and New Age spirituality, this obsession with self-love is leading people into the recapitulation of the fall of Lucifer. Because Lucifer loved himself because he was the most beautiful angel, that he wanted to be worshipped just as God is worshipped. And of course, a third of the angels go with him, and this is what we consider the demons. So whatever you think about that, for anybody listening, what you highlighted, even if you guys aren't believers and you look at this stuff like Petersonian symbolic Jungian language, you can still see that the recapitulation of the Luciferian fall is about people who are obsessed with loving themselves. It's the same thing. It's the myth of Narcissus, right? And when people are so focused on loving themselves, they actually become incredibly unloving. And so we would argue that Christ is the ultimate expression of love. Is Christ's love about because he kept telling everybody how much he loved himself and cared for himself, or that it was all about self-sacrifice because love was about something greater for a collective? That love is about a goal that transcends the individual and includes the other. That's why Christ's sacrifice is the ultimate act of love. It's the ultimate act of sacrifice for somebody who is divine, who is God, who is knowledgeable, and then chooses willingly through kenosis, a self-limiting, to experience human suffering in the ultimate way. And so what could be more masculine than that? And so masculine love is about me becoming the best version of myself for other people. It's not about me becoming the best version of myself so I can consume the most or have the most pleasure. Now you're a woman because you're the receptive vehicle. Right. Yep. So that's the irony about it, is like, well, who's the receptive one in sex? And if what you're doing is consumerism, that's a pretty feminine habit, because what you do as a man is you build yourself, you try to accord your will with God so that you are a tool to the community. You can love and work and perform and sacrifice for other people. How else can you demonstrate love? And I think so many people who constantly say they love themselves, when they get in a relationship, it's, oh, well, they pleasure me right now, but now they don't pleasure me, so I don't love you anymore. And so it's never about love, because their love was never built on the willingness to sacrifice themselves. It was always built on you accommodating and pleasuring me, and that I'm satiated right now. And now I'm no longer satiated. I don't think we love each other anymore. Such a good point. Such a good point. It's like the fall of love in the modern world. It's all about pleasure and momentary pleasure and satisfaction.
Right. And that's where suffering, orthodoxy, it's just so explicit. This is where the part it's hard for young guys. I think not the guys. I would say probably the women more than the guys. The guys kind of step up to the challenge. But to be Orthodox means like you embrace suffering, because the whole paradigm is built on the idea, just like working out, you have to stress the muscle and you have to break it down so that through hypertrophy, it could build back bigger. The same thing is true spiritually. So unless you suffer in this life, you cannot grow spiritually. That is the prerequisite. That's what it means to carry your cross and follow Christ, is that you're willingly to take on whatever is going to come moving forward, the suffering that's going to transform you into an image more like Christ. And I think when we get into the new age or the psych, that's the big thing they don't want to do. Like when I was talking about the new age, is suffering is like the ultimate sin, right? If you're suffering, something has gone drastically wrong, because the only thing that is bad is to harm other people. So if you're suffering, somebody must have harmed you. And this is a sin. This is a degradation of your life and who you're supposed to be. And it's like, no, actually, Orthodoxy says the exact opposite. And this is why the Bolshevik Revolution, the Ottoman takeover, the rise of Islam, like Orthodoxy has faced the most intense persecution for the life of the church, but really during the fall of the Byzantine Empire moving forward. And look at all those communities. They're still here. They're still.
That's a good point, man. That's a good point.
Why? Because the suffering galvanizes those people and makes them more like Christ. And that is the thing. It's like, do you want to jump into that? It's a big question. I think this is the thing that when we're really, once you get into the church and you really start taking this stuff seriously, like this is a question I think a lot of people have to kind of confront with themselves. Is like, damn, becoming Orthodox is incredibly meaningful. And if you do it for the right reasons, you'll never regret it. But it's not rainbows and sunshine. That's not the point of it. The point is the opposite of it. The point is that you can embrace suffering. This is where Jordan Peterson gets into suffering and truth and embracing your suffering. It's like, for what purpose? For Jungian psychology? Because saying the truthful thing is use first or societal like orientation? No, it's because it actually strengthens your soul. It actually makes you more like Christ. And the more you go through, the more you can endure.
Yeah, it's like when you get into martial arts, for example, and you think it's all cool and you have some videos of you hitting the bags and hitting the pads and it looks great on your Instagram and everything. And then you get into the part where you start sparring and you get beaten up a few times and you're like, holy shit, do I really want to do this? I mean, this is tough stuff. And if I get in the ring, that's the ultimate form of, like you'll never be more alive when you're in the boxing ring fighting against another like trained weapon, right? So, but you have that process where you're like, holy shit, this is a serious path that I'm going on here. And if I do this, there's going to be massive consequences and it's going to really beat me down a lot, but it's for a purpose to actually develop me physically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think combat sports it's really just really important for the formation of every young man to think, like, to come in contact with reality. Like there's
I think that's the real ego death. When we talk about
he's never been punched before. There's something to that.
Oh yeah. When we talk about ego death, like the psychedelic ego death is one thing, but I think that that's the real ego death that people need. It's something that breaks you down and builds you up and breaks you down and builds you up and breaks you down and builds you up, because you're so right. When you come in contact with people who have never been punched in the face before, the beautiful thing about the gyms is that you literally leave your ego at the door in a way. And if you don't, then you'll just get humbled and humbled and humbled, and there's no place to hide. You can't talk your way out of it. You can't tell stories. It's just raw, and you will get beaten up and you will get humbled. And if you don't fix your attitude, then you'll just never grow.
Right. No, absolutely. And
yeah, man.
And that's why, like I said, combat sports, I think it's not like you go out and be a fighter or anything. It's just about, and if you're around people in combat, so like at your boxing gym, when you're not sparring, those guys are the nicest people you could meet, because again, it's like men don't have anything to prove if there's a place to actually prove things. Like that dynamic, that interpersonal dynamic, that kind of chicky, like backstabbing vibe. Men don't, like, if there's a hierarchy in which we can already like demonstrate who's superior, once we're not doing that, it's like we can all get along really, really well now. Like men need the hierarchy, and that's where sports and competition allows the hierarchy to be very evident for us, so we can see where we fit in the hierarchy. And then we can assume our role, and then we can, grow and improve in that hierarchy. And that's fulfilling. And that's like what male relationships are about.
Absolutely. So last thing, I've kind of butchered this question before, but it is something that I'm going to try my best to articulate a little bit better. Jay's actually in the chat right now. And
shout out Jay. God bless you.
Yeah,
bro.
one of the things that I find really interesting about some of Jay's videos is when he does these breakdowns about sort of the history of the world and the history of various different religions, and then how Christianity came along and completely changed that. and how a lot of these religions, like Hinduism and stuff, they because they don't know the truth of Christianity, they're still sort of terrified by these demons and all of these spirits. And I see that a lot when I'm in Southeast Asia. There's this sort of petrification of these spirits that's constantly happening, and they're constantly trying to appease these demons and burn the bad spirits so that they can leave the island and everything. Whereas Christianity has a completely different relationship with the demonic, and a different view of the demonic. So when you look at that and the history of the world and all world religions, and then how the New Age interacts and how people interact with the New Age compared to Christianity, and then particularly with how people look at death and how people look at the eternal, what is the big conflict there that you see in terms of how you looked at it when you were in the New Age, and how you looked at it when you became more Christian, with how you look at particularly death and how you look at the story of the eternal, if that makes sense?
Right. I think the big one for me was the recognition that everything I do actually matters. I think when you're in the New Age, it's like, again, there's no real concept of sin. So when you're talking about death, what is death to a New Ager? I mean, I think if you ask them on average, they'd probably say something like, well, they may believe in reincarnation, which kind of diminishes the judgment, right? The judgment of death. It's like, okay, well, even if I'm bad, maybe I'll be a woman in the next life. It's like, okay. I mean, the New Ager wouldn't say that, but the Hindu would. But the New Age would say, you know, they wouldn't diminish.
That's terrifying. We'd have all cat fights and like all the gossip and stuff. That's terrifying, man.
So I think for me and my transition personally was realizing like what you do matters. Like that's the game that you're signing up for. Like every decision, like how you talk with people, when you're sharp with people. My experience from being Orthodox and participating and being a regular attendee in the services and taking the Eucharist and participating in the sacraments is I've become more and more aware of my shortcomings. The irony is I'm way better than I was when I started, right? And the paradox is that I'm more aware of my shortcomings than ever before. And so like when I first got into the church, I still had that New Age mentality. I was like, man, I'm a good person. Like I didn't really do anything in all those 20 years. Never really stole from anybody, never harmed him. You know, I'm good. And then you get in there and then you become more aware of like all your thoughts, all the tempestuous and lustful and demonic thoughts that occur. And you're like, geez, I have a lot of baggage I got to work on. And so death becomes something that is much more important and much more of a recognition of what is going to happen after that. Because for the New Age, I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It's like YOLO, right? If they're not a reincarnating, multi-life person, but it's like, okay, live your best life, do your orgies, go to your ceremonies, have your experiences, don't fall victim to the patriarchy. And there's just not a lot there in regards to dealing with the problem of death. It's just about like more knowledge and more experience, where Orthodoxy is saying, look, we're all going to die. That's a doorway none of us are going to escape. What is the point of life? And that's just something that you have to sit with and wrestle with personally, because everything we said today, or, I know some people aren't Orthodox and probably think I'm like on some soapbox. The point is just to present my paradigm. But, for a lot of people, what I said today is like a little bit too woo-woo, a little bit too spiritual. They're not ready for, talking about Christ in a way in which other people can make fun of you. And the only way you get there is like an interior recognition, like this is real. This is absolutely real. And one way you can get there is through your prayer life. I always tell people that are like new on the journey, like coming back to Christianity, and I say, like, have you got down on your knees in silence in a room by yourself and like genuinely, authentically, with the wholeness of your heart, like had a conversation with the creator of the universe? Like just genuinely. Nobody's there. You don't have to tell anybody about it, but did you just try to talk to him as if it's real? And I've never once have I talked to somebody who's done that and said something didn't happen. And it could have been days later, could have been weeks later, but whatever they had in their conversation that's just unique between them and God something emerges through providence in their life that revalidates this journey. And you can only, and then again, God only gets there through here. So you have to accept it, and then you can see the hands of God begin to work in your life. And you may see them before you get there, because everybody's journey is different. These aren't like definitional rules for spirituality or Christianity, but just generally. And I think that if you're on this journey and you're maybe struggling with like faith or whether all this shit's real, they're talking about God and church and tradition and the Eucharist. They believe Jesus Christ is present in the Eucharist. Can you believe this? It's like, dude, like, go on the journey, man. Like, you can make fun of me. It's easy to do. It's very easy to make fun of people that have like strong religious convictions. It's very easy to make fun of that. And it plays well. But like, are you happy when you go to bed at night? Like, are you fully fulfilled? And if there's a piece of you that just feels like there's something, just do it. Just say that prayer, have that conversation, and just see what happens. I guarantee you something will happen that will then validate and allow you to take the next step, and then the next step, and the next step. And that's what proves the faith. We can do tag arguments. We can do all the rational arguments for church history, doctrine, dogmas, schisms. And that's really good for men. It helps them like conceptualize the church, conceptualize what the community that they're being a part of. But that's not what makes you keep going. And if that's what gets you in the church, and that's the only reason, you're going to get out within a year. I guarantee it. Because when you get baptized as an Orthodox Christian, you spit on Satan. And I'm telling you, weird shit happens and it becomes difficult. Almost every young man that I've talked to that takes it very seriously, when they get brought in. Now, some of them have euphoric experiences and there's a moment of grace for weeks, maybe months. But for many people, crazy shit begins to happen in your life and becomes more difficult. Things that like feel like there's somebody sabotaging you, and it's because it's happening. It's real. But do you want that? Do you want to go on this journey? Because if you do, it's also a blessing. The meaning, the purpose, and the grace and the blessings. It's not just suffering. God gives you blessings in return, but it's a journey. You don't know where you're going to go. And that's why I'm here with you tonight. My whole goal was to be a professor. Orthodoxy has brought me through this whole YouTube thing and building my own business to try to have some type of platform where I'm not beholden to a university. And here we are. But that whole journey of even creating content and going through that process was one of faith that was validated by God literally working in my life, which I can't convince anybody of. And that's the thing about apologetics. Like, we can do all these rational arguments, but if you really want to know the truth, you got to it's all interior, and you got to do it yourself. And that's what's going to keep you there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was a very insightful, man. Like, I really relate to it as well, because I was speaking to Father Josiah Trenham when I went to a conference in London a few months back, and I saw him there, and I was like, I've been watching his channel, want to go and have a chat with him.
Pretty intimidating figure in person,
huge
right?
guy in real life.
Yeah.
Super intimidating. But intimidating not in the sense that he will probably punch you in the face or something,
right,
but intimidating in the sense that you know that if you say any bullshit, he's going to see right through it. You know those guys?
Yes.
You just can't pull the wool over his eyes, and he just looks right through you. So had this chat with him, and I was talking about all of the debates that I watch online, but saying that it kind of left me a little bit unfulfilled, because there's only so much that you can ascertain through just solidifying the logical foundations in your head all of the time. And he just said to me, you're all in your head and you need to focus more on the heart, because you can only get so far by just focusing on the head all the time. You need to focus more on the heart, prayer, getting into church, community, all of these types of things. And so that's what I've been working on recently. So really that resonates with me a lot, man. I think I've kept you here over 2 hours now. We have to get into these super chats.
One concluding comment. Yeah, real quick, but just because you were talking about what Father Josiah, and it goes back to that epistemological hierarchy, right? So it's like the rationalism for us is on the bottom. Doesn't mean it's not important. It's huge. It's foundational, literally, for how we can perceive the world. It's foundational. But to get to the point of revelation, you have to go through the subjective, which it's in the interiority of your heart. So I just wanted to make that point, connect what I said earlier with the epistemological hierarchy with exactly what you said. And that's where Orthodoxy is kind of, again, it validates the subjective experience so much that how can postmodernism compete with us? Because we have everything that they want with the subjective mystical reality, but then we have an entire rational metaphysical basis underneath it. They can't compete. And I don't think modernity can compete. I think either modernity ends in the apocalypse, or it's going to crumble and something new is going to form. And it's going to be pre-modern. That's just where things are going.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And guys, make sure to smash that like button if you're still in here. And if you haven't checked out Church of the Eternal Logos, linked right below, make sure to check that out. Let's go through some of these super chats, man. Some of them are questions, some of them are statements. So Blaine said, started things off right from the beginning there. John Dinan said, hit the super chat goal in Elon Musk is a traitor. You saw that popping off in the news this morning, hey? The Trump versus Elon feud.
It is interesting how things are unfolding.
Yeah. Miss D sent $8. That Brad said to wholesome positive content. Wholesome positive content indeed.
Thanks, Brad.
Red Fox sent 100 and said, Lord Jake, great guest. I love David Patrick Harry's perspective.
Thank you very much,
Red Fox is a great contributor. He's come over to your channel sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah, Red Fox is a great one.
Yeah, he is.
Rattlesnake TV gifted 5 memberships. I think.
Whoa, look at this generous guy.
I know, that was my brother Vinny, the producer, just giving out memberships. John Dinan says, here's some Uber Eats money. Let's see more memberships gifted in the chat. And then just like that, Thomas O'Brien comes with 10. Isaac gifted 5. And Bree became a new member. Thanks for all the gifted memberships, guys. Appreciate that. Tristan said, is this what happens when you don't have kids at 18? I don't know really what he means by that. And Patrick said, almost sounds like a method to access the subconscious mind or unconscious minds. I think that this was talking about the psychedelics, a method to access subconscious or mind or unconscious minds.
I mean, I do believe that there's aspects to the theories of the unconscious. I don't adopt a full Freudian interpretation, but when we're talking about the psychedelic experience, I think it's a piercing into what we call as Orthodox, the noetic realm. And so I think what's happening when you're on psychedelics is like you can be physically in your bedroom, but noetically, which again is kind of incorporating the mind, it's somewhere else. It's moved beyond. And so now you're in your room, but you're looking at your room and it looks like you're in a cave because the mind, again, this is where the mind is perceiving physical reality this way through the psychedelics. And how much agency does the individual have in the constructions that they are presenting themselves? Nobody has an answer on that. It's a very interesting question, and that's where set and setting, they always talk about is so important for psychedelics. But I would argue it's not just a conscious submersion or the presentation of the subconscious can be, but I also argue it's really a dissolving of the veil or the barrier between the noetic realm, like where demons and angels are, and you.
Right.
And so you're right next to them.
What do you think about dreams? Just quickly, just a quick side tangent. Do you how do you interpret dreams? Do you see the whole Freudian perspective about how they're sort of stories of the unconscious mind, or?
To some degree, I think dreams, obviously the Bible with the prophet Daniel, like he was famous for interpreting dreams. Do I think that dreams can have deeper symbolic messages? Yes. Do I think every dream needs to be uncoded based on, what were the astrological positions of the planet were when you had this dream? Because, astral light may have been coming in and affecting no. And I don't believe that every dream you have is deeply meaningful. I think sometimes they're just random based on like thoughts you had in the day previous or during that day. So the church and somebody who's way more spiritually attuned than I am would be the one that'd be the arbiter on whether a dream is actually conveying a divine message or, your synapses were just firing at night.
Yeah, right. Guys, get your super chats in now if you have any questions as we get towards the end of them here. Jordan says, what do you guys think about ultra-personalized Protestantism, Jesus is my best friend stuff? Self-worship seems to be fully normalized. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I totally agree that the Jesus is my best friend. Now, obviously you can have you're building a friendly, if you want to use that word, relationship with God, but he's not your friend. He's your savior. He is God. And so I think what this is, this mentality, this diminution of Jesus as like your bestie, wearing jorts with you on the beach, it's like it diminishes the transcendent power. It's taking the transcendent, bringing it and putting it in worldly terms, as opposed to us trying to move from worldly terms into something higher. And so I think Jesus is my best friend. Do you have to submit to your best friend?
Yeah.
No. but do you have to submit to God? Like, do you have to submit to the Almighty? If Jesus is my Almighty, if Jesus is my master, do you have to submit? Of course you do, but you don't have to submit to your best friend. So it's a way to like diminish the status of Christ and the Godhead to make it like a little bit like you're more on parallel terms with them. That's kind of the way I interpret it.
Yeah, and for me, it's like I would agree with everything you say, but I'd say it is a pretty good song, though.
Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. I have a friend in Jesus. Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine.
So I mean, it is a tune. It is a good tune, you know. Like I agree with most of the things you said, but the part where you said it's not a good tune, I don't agree with that. So. All right. So Miss D for $15 says, DPH, may God bless you and your union with 12 new beautiful babies, endless love and lifelong health. Is that
so much, Miss?
Is that on the cards?
I mean,
beautiful babies.
I don't know about 12, but I got married last August, and we do plan, God willing, have multiple children. So I need to get a little bit more successful, make sure I can feed all of them. But whenever it happens, it happens. So it's all in God's hands.
Yeah, nice, man. Thank you, Miss D. I appreciate that. Just Gerald says DPH is the man. Oh, hi, Jake W. Double based stream 07. Just Gerald in the chat. Always great to see Just Gerald in there. Also, shout out to Lord Rattle for being a solid dude, top tier individual. I reckon Just Gerald is a top tier individual. What do you reckon, DPH?
Sounds like it. I mean, it sounds like he's got good taste. So clearly,
yeah.
If a man has that good a taste, he must be a top tier individual.
Absolutely. Patrick Roby for $10 says, question, how is metaphysics explained in the Orthodox learned by you or Jay's teachings? Catholic or Christian teachings and or Dr. Joe Dispenza, and how he explains metaphysics and this one's for you. I've got no idea what's happening.
I'm not familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza's work. I'm not sure what the question is. Are you just asking like how we understand metaphysics from an Orthodox perspective?
I think so, yeah.
Because it kind of the way it's worded sounds like learned by you or Jay's teachings, like we came up with this. So I'm not sure, Patrick Roby, sorry to impute any, not sure exactly what you're arguing, but in regards to how we understand metaphysics, the way we understand that is Christ, the Logos, is the metaphysics. So what is happening in the Gospel of John is the unification of what was very common at that time. The Greek philosophical tradition, going back to Heraclitus, was talking about logos. Logos, now this wasn't a god, it was a demiurge. It was a created thing for Plato the One, but the logos was the unifier of opposites. The logos was the source of reason. The logos was the source of mathematics. This is replete throughout Greek philosophy, but the logos isn't God, and the logos isn't a person. Meanwhile, in the Hebrew tradition of the Old Testament, they're waiting for a Messiah, which is God and is a person. And what the Gospel of John is showing is that what the Greeks were studying through metaphysics and philosophy is the abstract understanding of who the incarnated God is. And so metaphysically, he is the source of what we call the logi, the archetypes or patterns of creation. Everything, so all archetypes are rooted within the logos. Again, he is the unifier of all opposites. So everything has its archetypal and teleological origin in the logos. So when we talk about Christ as Orthodox Christians, we mean logos. We mean all of this, all the metaphysics, all the logismy, the temptations in the noetic mind, the logi, the archetypes of creation, the telos of things created, all the objective structures, the laws of logic, mathematics, all of this cymatic, sacred geometry, it's all rooted within the logos, who is Jesus Christ. And so he then is the physical embodiment of perfection, and he is the source of all metaphysic unity.
That answers it pretty comprehensively. FB for $20 says, I'm reading the book Jim Bob recommends, God is a Man of War. Since secular humanists use the bad things in the Bible to say God is immoral, but what they don't consider is God made the prescriptions for us and not himself.
Have
you got that one there somewhere?
I was looking for that book.
The bookshelf gets big sometimes, eh?
Yeah. I have like multiple bookshelves. It's on one of them somewhere, so don't have it on me. Was that a question?
I think, have you, if you've read that book, maybe
Some secular
recommendation or-
humanists use the bad things in the Bible to say God is immoral, but what do they consider is God made the prescriptions for us, not for himself? I'm not sure what to say in
That's all good.
response.
Chris Scott sent $5. Thank you, Chris. A great man. Met him down at Debate Con. FB
Nice.
for $10 said St. Michael the Archangel that defeated Lucifer.
True.
After Lucifer turned into a nightmarish dragon that knocked 1/3 of the stars out of the sky, he was still powerful enough to defeat St. Michael. Anything on that?
Well, yeah, we would argue that Lucifer doesn't really have a lot of power. According to tradition, we believe that Lucifer was already promised before the fall, like a sort of guardian of Earth, of this particular planet. Now, his own pride led to his fall, moving from Lucifer falling into the dragon on this planet as Satan, as the devil. And so his agency is all about temptation. His agency is that he can mix lies with truth. Again, very much like the corporate media that we're all bombarded with. And so the power of Lucifer is that he can do nothing against God's energies, right? Because he is the privation of them. He is the absence of God. He's the absence of divine energy. So what he does is to get back at God, who he can't do anything against, is he takes God's loving creation, humanity, and tries to take them to the place that he already is. Because what's psychedelic about all this stuff is this is happening, you know, when we're talking about angels and we're talking about God, we're talking about a place in eternity, outside space and time. And so when you think about the judgment, like it's already happening to some degree. So when you're talking about like, does God know the end and the beginning? Well, of course, he's not inside space time. He's looking at it like a complete thing. We are in it and we are making choices through our free will right now. But in a sense, it's already happened. It's a mystery. It's a paradoxical mystery in regards to God's knowingness of the historical time and our participation in it, because it is a participation. We're not determinists. You're given free will. And if we were determinists, you wouldn't have sin, because how could you be guilty for anything? So, yeah, Satan can't defeat Saint Michael because he can't defeat anything that's filled with the energies of God. What he can do is tempt us so that we become embodiments for demons. In a sense, we become demons here on earth because demons don't have physical bodies. So the whole game for them is to take physical form within us.
Yeah, I've met a few of those actually.
Through our imagination. And so when you accept thoughts, when you accept ideologies, you're allowing something to slowly possess you. That's how we see it.
FB also says Lucifer was so arrogant and prideful that he thought no one even stood a chance at defeating him. Lucifer thought he could defeat God, but he lost to one of God's subjects. Is that right, David?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's so prideful. I mean, he doesn't have power against the angels. He really doesn't even have full power against us rather than temptate. I mean, all he can do is tempt us. Now that is very, very strong when we're weak. And that's why addiction is something to stay away from, because that is a potential conduit for the evil one or the demons to possess you. So that's what it means to die to the world, is to die to any sort of attachment to anything, but not in a Buddhist way where you give up on your identity and your family and your heritage. No. You accept all that. It's just you die to the temptations of this world so that he can't ransack you and bring you down to where he's going to be. And because of that, we believe that judgment is totally based on your own doing. As Orthodox Christians, you and I are choosing our judgment today because we're not Protestants. So we don't believe in faith alone. We believe faith and works go together. Obviously, the Protestants will say that we're all works. They don't know our theology. But the point is, we do believe that you can lose your salvation. So unlike some Protestant churches that claim that if you did your altar call in 1987, that in 2025, you may not be going to church or in a community, but you're good. You made your claim that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, right? Okay, you're good. And it's like, no, Orthodox say, no, you could be a monastic in great standing, filled with divine energy, and towards the end of your life, fall into debaucherous sin, and you could lose your salvation. This is a dynamic process of participation with God. And so it's a lifelong, and we never know when we're going to die. But the goal is to make sure you're filled with that divine energy and you're a conduit for the transcendent, so that when you die, yeah, we all have sin. We're all going to fall short, but you don't die. You're going to make it through Judgment Day.
Abject Fool for $10 says, has Dr. DPH heard about what's happening with Metropolitan Neophytos or Morphu?
Now I am aware of what's going on in Cyprus. So they've like, I don't think they've defrocked, but they've essentially fired one of their bishops. They've, I forget what the term is. I'm having a brain fart right now, but diminished his status within the church, one of the bishops, and he was a really good one. And Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu is probably the person in global orthodoxy that is speaking so directly about the New World Order, the Great World War that's going to come, all the prophecies from Mount Athos and some of the Russians, the Ukraine-Russian war, transhumanism, like all the things that streams like you and I talk about, those topics. Metropolitan Neophytos is a bishop, metropolitan in Cyprus who gets all of it. And I don't know what he's referring to exactly, but one of my fears was, based on what happened to the bishop, is that there's going to be powers that be that are going to try to limit and stifle some of these voices, these very traditional conservative voices out of Cyprus. Like Metropolitan Neophytos is very clear that he calls Zelensky of Ukraine a Khazar. Now, I'm not going to get into all that stuff, but that is a deep web that if you understand what that reference means, it means that Metropolitan Neophytos, he's connected a lot of dots. Okay. And he's an ascetic. This isn't somebody who's on the internet all the time. I believe that he's gifted with spiritual knowledge because he knows things that it took me years to study. And I doubt that he's studying, but he knows them. And so he's a great spiritual figure. If you guys are into conspiracies and you kind of know what's going on, go check out some of the translations of Metropolitan Neophytos, or I have a whole stream going over some of his stuff. You can check it out on my channel.
Yeah, I need to check that out for sure, man. That sounds really interesting. I watched your whole thing about the Khazars and very, very interesting stuff. Bill Hicks for $5 says Christ has ascended. Absolutely. And last one here, we've got American Nacho says DPH is awesome. Dude. So happy for this crossover. God bless you both.
Hey, shout out to American Nacho. I just was in Milwaukee with him. Great dude. In fact, I got to send you your external or your power block that you left in my rental car. So I'll be putting that in the mail probably tomorrow. So thank you so much, American Nacho. God bless you, brother. We had so much fun this weekend.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, any last words and where people can find you other than the Church of the Eternal Logos YouTube, etc.?
I'm actually rebranding. I'm currently in the process of my old YouTube channel. I had a YouTube channel called Fractal Universe. It was at like 97,000 subs right before I took all the psychedelic content down. That was right when I became Orthodox. And so I'm getting ready to I've been kind of dual streaming and getting all the new age people. I've been putting all my Orthodox stuff over there. So I've lost about 20,000 subs. It's like down to 74,000, which was fine. That was the plan. And so I'm going to rebrand that as a personal brand, take all that content down. So if you search Dr. David Patrick Carey, that YouTube channel will come up. And then Church of the Eternal Logos is going to be my platform for long form content. That's really what it's going to focus on. And then pretty soon, I'm going to have my school community up. So we'll have a whole community and membership program. Right now we have it through my website, but school offers so much. And there's so many courses I want to make that I just signed up. And my goal is in the next week to have that community up and running over there. So if you want to check out my stuff, website, davidpatrickharry.com, and the YouTube channel that's going to speak most explicitly to the topics we discussed today would be Church of the Eternal Logos.
Nice. Last one here. Isaac Hayes says, the one thing I disagree with David about is weed being feminizing makes you more emotional. I'd actually argue it does the opposite. Probably not going to get too far into that.
Well,
but
I mean, marijuana is a female plant, right? So hemp is the male version. Marijuana is the female version. You know, I'm not going to debate how he feels, whether weed is feminizing him or not. You know, it's his own opinion, but I think you can make a strong case that it does.
Yeah, and there are various other things that are turning the frogs gay and all of that. So it's all happening. Yeah.
Well, shit, you should look at
anyways, man.
Bay Area.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad that you've settled down and gotten married recently. Very inspiring stuff, and also gotten your doctorates, and excited for what's to come for the future for you.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you having me on, and I'd love to have you on my channel to talk about just kind of where you are in your own journey and the pieces that you're putting together. And I'm sure a lot of people watching over on my channel would be in a similar position you're at and could relate to where you are and what you've done and what you see and where you feel. And we just have a larger discussion on culture and things that are happening. So if you're available, I'd love to do a stream over on my channel with you.
I'd love to, man. That'd be fantastic.
All right.
All right, guys. Well, take care of yourselves and we'll see you next time.